Chapter 1403. He finally began to feel hatred. Hatred was like weeds. Once it grew, it would spread and become a disaster. He wanted to take revenge for her change of heart. But he also wanted to imprison her by his side, not allowing her to go anywhere. His biggest thought was to wash away her memories of Shinjiuli, return to the demon world with him, and become his demon empress. But if he wanted to erase her memories, he had to take advantage of her being seriously injured and unable to fight back to use that kind of demonic technique. But at that time, Shui Yimo's martial arts were already not low. After staying by Shinjiuli's side for a year, her martial arts were already incomparable to when she was in the demon world. Even he was not her opponent, and he could not find a chance to seriously injure her. Once a wish became an obsession, he would become a demon. He had been trying to find such an opportunity. That day, in order to improve his martial arts, he took advantage of the demon ancestor's absence to secretly search his residence. He did not find any secret books that could improve his martial arts, but he did find Shui Yimo. It was also the first time he saw Shui Yimo. Shui Yimo had been imprisoned and tortured by the demon ancestor for so long. The demon ancestor probably thought that she could not escape no matter what, so he did not hide any secrets from her, letting her know many unknown secrets. Shui Yilan finally learned those secrets from her. For example, the secret of the demon ancestor's reproduction. For example, the current demon ancestor wanted to be immortal, so he deliberately took the heart blood of a god to cultivate. As long as he cultivated for 3 years, he could reconstruct the demon god, return to normal, and obtain immortality. For example, the memory of the demon ancestor's successor was not easy to erase. Only when her twin sister used a special method to seriously injure her could it be erased. After Shui Yilan learned these secrets, he had an idea and negotiated with Shui Yimo. He could help her get rid of the demon ancestor's imprisonment and help her ascend to the position of the demon ancestor's successor. The premise was that she had to listen to his command and plot against Shui Yimo. Shui Yimo naturally agreed. Shui Yilan also knew that this woman was vicious. When he established the agreement with her, he secretly did something to her body. If she did not betray him, it would be fine. But once she did, he would activate the forbidden spell on her body, causing her to instantly lose 2/3 of her martial arts. This way, he could quickly control and punish her. Everything went smoothly. He and the snow-robed talisman worked together to seriously injure the fiend ancestor and escape. Shui Yilan would look for Shui Yimo and lure her into the trap. While Shui Yitong would go there in advance to lay an ambush, Shui Yilan had been loyal and devoted to Shui Yimo for his entire life, so he didn't have the heart to plot against her. He tried to sound her out. Even if she showed the slightest hint of giving up on reviving Shinjiuli, he still didn't want to use this method. But no, Shui Yimo seemed to have eaten a heavy weight. In order to revive Shinjiuli, she was willing to pay any price. Thus, he finally steeled his heart and lured her to the forbidden land of ice and snow, allowing the snow-robed talisman to successfully plot against her. Everything had been very successful. The only thing he hadn't expected was that Snowy Talisman had actually ignored his earlier warning and killed Snowy Yimo without permission. Shui Yimo was forced to turn into a devil, severed all ties with him, and sealed him underground. He didn't know whether it was fate or misfortune, but 3,000 years later, under the miscalculation of Yin and Yang, it was actually her reincarnation who personally undid the seal for him. 3,000 years of great changes had turned the forbidden land of ice and snow into the heavenly book mountain. Perhaps it was because his obsession with Shui Yimo was too deep, even after 3,000 years. Chapter 1404. Perhaps it was because his obsession with Shui Yimo was too deep. After 3,000 years, although he had lost all memories of Shui Yimo when he woke up, he still had a vague impression of her. The moment he saw Ning Xuema, he couldn't help but entangle himself with her. He couldn't bear to hurt her later. He was injured by Shinjiuli. When he was hiding underground to recuperate, he didn't know what he touched, but it actually made his memories completely awaken. He finally recognized his Momo, but she no longer had the feelings of the past for him, and always hated him. She also fell in love with Shinjiuli again. He didn't know what happened after she sealed him in her previous life, nor did he know how she died. In order to understand the truth, he secretly arranged to read her memories in her dreams, and finally understood another part of the truth that he didn't know in his previous life. It was only then that he understood that in his previous life, Shui Mo didn't take Shenjuli's heart blood for the demon world's mission, but to save him. She had never let him down, and she had always treated him as her best friend. It was he who personally killed the friendship between them, and it had reached an irreversible step. Initially, he wanted to read all of her dreams to find out the truth. However, he did not expect Shenjuli to discover the goo-venomous insect that he had placed on the moonlight flute. He removed the goo-venomous insect that he had placed on the moonlight flute. Ning Xuema was boiled, and he arrived in time to save her. She also completely gave up on Shenjuli and began to accept him. He thought that he had finally come to the end of his suffering. He only wanted to grasp the present and didn't want to pursue the past. But he didn't expect to find Shui Mo's hanging coffin here. And Ning Xuema also recovered her true memories and resolutely left. Momo, I never wanted to kill you. I just didn't want you to be the demon ancestor's successor. I just wanted to wash away all your memories and take you back to the demon world. Momo, you should be mine. But you only have that man in your eyes. I've always been by your side, but you can't see me, Momo. I just want you to see me. Only by severely injuring you will I have the chance to erase all the memories of Shenjuli from your mind. I saved the snowy talisman because I wanted her to be the devil ancestor's successor. Only then will you be free. I want you to be my demon empress. The road was filled with clouds, and the future was boundless. Ning Xuema stood in the void, looking at the vast and boundless Milky Way and the dazzling stars. She was somewhat absent-minded. Everything seemed to have been answered, and she could only sigh. Fate made fools of people. She took out the small jade bottle from her bosom, pulled out the cork, and scattered the ashes in the bottle into the void. In her previous life, she lived a lonely and bitter life. She struggled in the dark world and finally found love, but she destroyed it with her own hands. In the end, she ended up in such a pitiful and lamentable state. The specks of light that filled the skies slowly dispersed into the boundless universe, drifting far away. The story of Shui Mo had already ended with her death. What about her Ning Xuema? Where should she go now? She simply sat in the void, hugging her knees and lost in thought. Shui Lan had plotted against her in her previous life. To tell the truth, although she was angry at being betrayed by her good friend, now that she thought about it, she could roughly understand why Shui Lan had done that. Shui Lan loved Shui Mo. He loved her to the point of obsession. In order to get her, he would do anything. She also knew that Shui Lan didn't really want to kill Shui Mo. He probably just wanted to take revenge for Shui Mo's coldness towards him. Chapter 1405. She also knew that Shui Lan didn't really want to kill Shui Mo. He probably just wanted to take revenge for Shui Mo's indifference to him. Or maybe he wanted to take the opportunity to imprison her and force her to stay by his side. But he didn't expect that Shui Mo would really turn into a demon. In fact, even if Shui Mo didn't turn into a demon, she wouldn't live long. Once she knew the forbidden technique to save Shenjuli, she would still do it without hesitation. So, she used the forbidden technique to exile herself to this cold and bitter land. It had nothing to do with Shui Lan. Strange, Shui Mo absorbed the snow cloth talisman and the demon ancestor's demon aura, and really turned into a demon. It was reasonable to say that as long as people in this world had 7 emotions and 6 desires, demons couldn't be killed. They could only be sealed and couldn't be completely dissolved. Then, the demon aura in her body should be sealed in the coffin with her, enduring the wind and rain of this cold and bitter land together. When she destroyed the coffin, she didn't notice the existence of the demon aura. Did it run away long ago? She also thought of the little lowly in her body, who often tried to tempt her into becoming a demon. That should be the demon. She didn't know why it hid in the body of the original Miss Ning of the Marquis Mansion, and absorbed all her psychokinesis, turning her into a super waste. And she just happened to cross over in the modern world, and possessed this Miss Ning's body. Not only did she take over Miss Ning's identity and body, but she also took over the demon in her body. Moreover, she couldn't drive it out. This was really a sin. Speaking of which, who was that little lowly? Snowcloth talisman? Demon ancestor? Or a new demon born from the 3 types of demon aura? She hadn't come out for a long time. Was she really refined? Shenjuli used that pot of soup to cook her. Was it actually to refine the demon in her body? Was it successful? Ning Xuema closed her eyes and sensed her dantian again. She deliberately let her psychokinesis wander around her dantian a few times. In the end, there was no reaction. Her dantian seemed to have really become a dantian for absorbing qi, and not a hiding place for the little demon child. When she was cooked by Shenjuli, she hated him to the bone. If she had enough strength at that time, she would have fought to the death with him. Later on, although she didn't impulsively fight him to the death, she had subconsciously rejected him and wanted to completely cut off all ties with him. That was why she never thought about him. Even if she did, it was full of negative energy. She did not judge him based on his good intentions. No matter what he did, it seemed like he had ulterior motives in her eyes. The more you care about someone, the easier it is to be calculative, the easier it is to get into a dead end, and the easier it is to be hurt. If someone else had done this to her, she would have calmly investigated the truth. If he was doing this for her own good, she would laugh it off. At most, she would kick him a few times to take revenge for being boiled in the frying pan. If he was taking revenge on her, she would also use other methods to get back at him. She would repay kindness with kindness and revenge with revenge. Instead of curling up in a corner and tangling with himself like he was now, she was so conflicted. It was not like her at all. Ning Xuemo used to think that she didn't have this bad habit, but now it seemed that this bad habit was not light. For example, even if she roughly guessed Shenjuli's real intention of boiling her, she still had a knot in her heart. This knot made her uncomfortable, and it was difficult for her to make a decision for a while. Chapter 1406. That way, even if she didn't hate him, she wouldn't be able to thank him. Moreover, there were still some other knots in her heart. For example, Shenjuli had slapped her onto a boulder for Wu Mo. For example, he had ignored her after raping her. For example, he had locked her in the ice purgatory and frozen her half to death. For example, he and Yunxi had gone to Lover's Island for 3 days. When they came back, they were still snuggled up to each other. For example, he had built a house for Yunxi on Tianyin Peak. She still remembered those days. She had been anxious, desperate, angry, from heaven to hell, from hope to despair. Moreover, the current Shenjuli only had Shui Mo's memories. He had long forgotten about his relationship with Ning Xuema. In his eyes, she was still a scheming bitch with ulterior motives. She had gotten close to him with ill intentions. What should I do? What should I do? She knew that she was still in love with him, but she also knew that she should look for him now and explain everything clearly to him. She should discuss everything openly, and then decide whether to leave or stay. But she didn't want to go yet. She didn't know how long she had been sitting on that boulder. It had been so long that she thought she had turned into space dust. Finally, she stood up. It was better to go find him. Let's talk first. Perhaps there were some misunderstandings. Even if they had to go their separate ways in the future, she didn't want to confusedly let it go. At the very least, she wanted him to know about the efforts that Shui Yemo had put in to revive him. At the very least, she wanted to understand what had happened between him and Yunxi. Perhaps, her previous conjectures didn't match the real situation at all? More importantly, if he really didn't have any feelings for her and didn't care about her anymore, then he wouldn't have followed her in the immortal kingdom, right? He had almost killed Shui Lan. It was the first time she had seen him so angry and murderous. That domineering aura had scared her so much that her whole body had turned cold, and her brain had almost crashed. It turned out that a god who was usually so indifferent could be so terrifying when he got angry. Was he jealous? The image of Shenjuli being stabbed by her flashed before her eyes. His heart jolted, as if someone had ruthlessly pinched it. A fire seemed to ignite in her chest, and this fire burned her mouth dry. No, she had to find him and make things clear right now. She had loved only him in both her past and present life. For him, She had even lived a life that was neither human nor ghost nor demon. She had paid such a huge price, so there was no need to miss it just because of some misunderstanding. She pondered over the events of her past life and this life, and felt that she no longer owed him anything. However, he still owed her an explanation. He even owed her the truth. She was the one who had used a forbidden technique, and paid such a heavy price to revive him. How could he give all the credit to someone else? She didn't want to be a silent Leifeng anymore. So, he owed her. She was going to find him, and make him pay for what he owed. Thinking of this, she didn't want to stop for a moment, and immediately stood up. He looked around, and was about to look for the spatial jump passage when he was suddenly stunned. She didn't know when the scenery around her had changed. Originally, she had been sitting on a large rock in a meteorite belt. On her left was a blue planet, and on her right was a red planet. Now, those two planets had disappeared, and the other galaxies she was once familiar with had also disappeared. Her surroundings were frighteningly unfamiliar, and she couldn't find a single familiar thing. Chapter 1407. She used to have coordinates when she jumped through the doors of time and space, so she wouldn't get lost. But now, all the coordinates were gone. It was as if she was lost in a black hole in the universe, and she couldn't find her way home. She stood there for a moment, and couldn't help but touch her forehead. Ning Xuema, are you a pig? You can travel 80,000 miles in a day by sitting on the ground. You should know this when you were in primary school. All the planets move at high speed, and the speed and trajectory are the same. She had been in a daze here for so long, and the reference objects around her had changed. She looked up again and was puzzled. Logically speaking, it was normal for the reference objects around her to change, but the changes in the distant galaxies in the sky were also abnormal, right? What exactly happened? What had happened while she was in a daze? Ning Xuema's ability to recognize directions had always been superb. Even if she was thrown into a desert without any coordinates, she could still walk out on her own. But now, she was in the middle of the universe, and in a place she was not familiar with at all. It would be difficult for her to find a place where humans lived, let alone go back. She calmed herself down, stood up hurriedly, and began to look for the doors of time and space. In the universe, every door of time and space was not in a fixed place, and they were constantly changing. Ordinary people would never be able to find them. They might bump into them by chance, and once they bumped into them, they might travel through time and space. In some science fiction novels, these doors of time and space were also called space doors. Alien intelligent beings drove flying saucers through these specific space doors to travel through time and distance to other planets. She had gone too far, and now she had to go back to the topic. When those immortal cultivators reached a certain level of cultivation, they could also sense the existence of the space doors, and they could travel through space freely, becoming immortals in the eyes of the world. As for Ning Xuema, she hadn't reached the heavenly realm, and she wasn't considered an immortal yet. With her ability, she couldn't sense the space doors. The few times she jumped through the space doors, she was led by others. Shen Jili brought her here before, and he kept her in a wizardry barrier. Shui Lan brought her here before, and they walked side by side. But now, she was the only one left here. If she wanted to escape from here, she could only rely on herself. Shui Lan was lost in thought for only a moment. When he collected his thoughts and looked up at Ning Xuema again, he found that she had already left this barren planet, flew up, and disappeared into the clouds. He stared blankly for a moment before his expression suddenly changed. This planet was very strange. It was in the middle of spatial turbulence, and was surrounded by spatial gates. If one blindly barged in, there was no telling where they would end up. When he entered other planets, he flew down from the sky, but when he appeared on this planet, he emerged directly from the sea. In other words, the spatial door leading to the place they were familiar with was in the sea, and not in the sky. Momo. His figure rose and flew up as fast as lightning. He wanted to catch up with her, stop her, and bring her back to a familiar place. He knew that she didn't want to see him now, but he couldn't abandon her. However, Ning Xuema's speed was too fast. He tried his best to catch up, but he couldn't catch up. He wanted to ask her to stop, But because his heart was in a mess, he couldn't. If he called her now, he was afraid that she would ignore him. It would be boring, and she might even run faster. So he had to catch up with her first. Both of them were as fast as shooting stars. Adding a chapter to beg for monthly votes. Chapter 1408. The two of them were like shooting stars chasing after the moon. In the end, Shui Yilan's martial arts were a little higher. When he saw that he was about to catch up, he mustered up his courage and was about to speak when he suddenly realized that the space around Ning Xuema had suddenly started to distort. The originally blue sky suddenly became dark and a big hole appeared. However, Ning Xuema did not notice it at all. Her figure directly entered the deep black hole and disappeared. Momo! Shui Yilan shouted. He steeled his heart and also flew towards the deep black hole. However, the big hole appeared suddenly and disappeared suddenly. Before he could reach it, the deep black hole disappeared, and the sky returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Shui Yilan's heart almost sank to the bottom of the earth. He often traveled through spatial doors, so naturally, he had heard of this kind of deep black hole. This kind of deep black hole was also called the land of death and dissolution. It was an extremely strange place. Any cultivator or devil that accidentally entered it would disappear and never appear again. No one knew what was inside this deep black hole, and no one knew what kind of accidents would happen to those who accidentally entered it. Whether it was the immortal realm, the devil realm, or the demon realm, they all set this place as the #1 forbidden area and avoided it like the plague. Who would have thought that Ning Xuema would accidentally enter it? Shui Yilan was about to go crazy. He circled around in the air, trying to find the deep black hole, and then rush in to save her. Even if he rushed in and could not come out, it was still better than her being alone in there. 1 day, 2 days? Or 1 month, 2 months? Ning Xuema did not know how long she had been in this strange place, nor did she know how long she had been flying. In here, time seemed to have stopped, and there was no distinction between day and night. It was as if she had become the dust of the universe, and everything was out of her control. With her current skills, although it was not easy for her to sense spatial doors, her sixth sense was very strong. Moreover, she had traveled through time and space with those two for so long. She was quite clear about spatial doors and knew where they usually existed. But now, she had been searching for so long, but she still couldn't find any trace of the space door. Cultivators who breathed in these places relied on the conversion of the psychokinesis in their bodies. In other words, flying here consumed her psychokinesis very quickly. Once the psychokinesis in her body was exhausted, she would be unable to breathe and would suffocate to death. They would truly become ignorant cosmic dust. If they died like this, their souls would truly scatter, and they wouldn't even be able to reincarnate. 4/5 of the psychokinesis in her body had been consumed. Her flying speed slowed down, and her body began to feel uncomfortable. Her brain also became a little dizzy because of the lack of oxygen. At this rate, if she still couldn't find the spatial door in 6 to 8 hours, she would be able to rest in peace in space. Despair filled her heart as she sighed inwardly. Was she and the Almighty destined to be together forever? She had finally untied the knot in her heart and made up her mind to look for him. She had not expected to encounter such a situation. If she died here silently, she was afraid that no one would know. Of course, Shinjuli would not know. He would probably think that she and Shui Yilan had been traveling through space for fun. Even if they hadn't seen each other for 300 to 500 years, he would not think that she had met with an accident. Her chest became more and more stuffy, and her eyes began to blur. Chapter 1409. She smiled bitterly. She didn't expect that after fighting for so long, she would end up like this. Shinjuli, you and I are not fated to be together. I can't repay what I owe you. You don't know what you owe me. After another 900 years, you will completely forget about my existence. Shinjuli, I'm suddenly envious of your ability to sleep for 900 years and forget everything after 10 years. Be it happiness or disappointment, everything will be gone when you wake up. She was so dizzy that she didn't know if she was going to continue flying or just float in space. When the darkness came again, she closed her eyes and was about to accept her fate. Suddenly, her stomach moved, as if a small hand was scratching it. The feeling was so strong that Ning Xuema's brain, which was on the verge of fainting, started to work again. She felt that there was a breath in her stomach, circulating quickly in her body. She didn't need to breathe or feel suffocated. What was going on? Could it be that the magic loli in her body hadn't disappeared, and didn't want to die with her? So it gave her another push? Ning Xuema instinctively looked at her energy center. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just like any other time. She was stunned for a moment. She closed her eyes again, and looked at the place where her stomach moved. She finally realized that it was her uterus. There seemed to be a living thing in her uterus. Ning Xuema's heart started to race. She knew what it meant to have a living thing in her uterus. She couldn't believe it. She and the Almighty had only slept together once. Did she hit the jackpot? But now, it had been more than 3 months since that rolling in the sheets. Then, it had exploded and reassembled in the purgatory of ice. And it had been boiled in the copper cauldron again and again. With all this torment, even if she was pregnant with the iron baby at that time, it would have been destroyed, right? Moreover, there would be pregnancy symptoms like morning sickness after pregnancy. However, she didn't feel any discomfort, and her stomach was still flat. As for her period, it seemed like she had never been normal ever since she started. Once every 3 months, once every 2 months, it was very common. There was even one time when it came after half a year. That was why she had never noticed the changes in her menstrual cycle. Now that she thought about it, after she had slept with Shen Juli, her period had never come. Was she really pregnant? She focused all her energy and looked into her womb. She could faintly see that there was indeed a small person inside. It was similar to the image seen with the ultrasound. He could barely make out the head and tail. It really was an embryo. She was really pregnant. At this moment, she felt all the blood in her body rushing to her head, and all her energy returned. She couldn't die. She was no longer alone but 2 people. For the sake of the baby in her womb, she had to live on. She gently stroked her lower abdomen with her fingers. As if telepathic, there was a slight movement there, as if a small foot had kicked it. Ning Xuema felt warmth in her chest, and hot tears instantly filled her eyes. She took a deep breath and gently rubbed it. Baby, I'll definitely take you away from here. I must show you this world. Your father still doesn't know of your existence, so I have to let you see him. Her lower abdomen bulged slightly again, as if the little guy in her womb was sticking out his little butt. Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile, but her eyes were inexplicably sore. For the sake of the child, she would do anything. Chapter 14:10. However, what made her feel a little strange was that normal children would only have fetal movements after 4 or 5 months of gestation. But her baby was only 3 months old at most. Unexpectedly, it was so lively that it had fetal movements at this time to remind her of its existence. Perhaps people in this era were developing ahead of their time? Moreover, its father was a god, and she was about to reach the heavenly realm and become a celestial. It was not too strange for her child to develop like this. As if she had been injected with chicken blood, she began to look for the space door again. Perhaps it was not her time to die, or perhaps it was the blessing brought by the baby in her belly. After about an hour, she finally sensed some information about the space door. Although she did not know where the space door led to, it was still a hope. It was better than waiting for death here. So Ning Xuema desperately rushed over. The blue light in front of her suddenly flashed, and she fell into a big whirlpool with countless shards. All kinds of scenery, all kinds of people, all kinds of buildings. Like a whirlwind, they whizzed past in front of her. There was a hurricane in the whirlpool, and the hurricane swept her around and pulled her. She felt that she was going to be torn apart, and the pain was unbearable. She subconsciously hugged her belly to protect it. Her baby was hard to come by, and she could not let anything happen to it in here. She did not know how long she had been in the whirlpool. Perhaps it was a quarter of an hour, or perhaps it was just a short moment. Finally, she came out of the whirlpool, and the blue sky and white clouds appeared in front of her. Blue sky and white clouds. She actually saw the blue sky and white clouds, and she fell between the blue sky and white clouds. She did not have time to think. and immediately used her psychokinesis to stabilize her body in the air. The wind blew in her face, and it was cool and pleasant. There was a familiar smell in the air. It was the smell that belonged to the air of her era. She was stunned, and subconsciously looked down, and her body froze. She was now 5 or 6,000 meters in the air. Looking down, she saw buildings that were smaller than matchboxes, and they were arranged in an orderly manner below. The river of cars meandered, and the lights were flashing brighter than the stars in the sky. She was stunned, and her eyes widened in disbelief. This was the place she had dreamed of, her own era. She had returned to her own era. Her legs suddenly became weak, and she almost could not stand in the air. Boom! A huge rumbling sound suddenly came from far below. She looked in the direction of the sound. Her eyesight was amazing now, so she could naturally see very far away. She saw a Boeing plane flying up from below. Ning Xuema could even see the person inside the plane through the small window. She saw a 5 or 6-year-old child with his face pressed against the window, looking at her in shock. His little mouth was wide open. Oh no! If the people on the plane saw her floating in the air, it would be another big news. Ning Xuema immediately hid her figure. Her ears were sharp, and she actually heard the child shouting, "Fairy sister! Fairy sister! Look, there's a fairy sister over there." A few faces were also pasted on the other windows. There were old and young male and female faces. But because Ning Xuema had hidden herself, they couldn't see anything. The child's parents also looked in the direction of Ning Xuema. And naturally, they didn't see anything. Naturally, no one would take the words of a 6 or 7-year-old child seriously. The child's mother hugged the child, but she didn't expose the child's lie. She kissed the child's forehead and said, "Baby is an angel, so he can see fairy sister." Chapter 14:11. Her gentle tone made the child very happy. She also kissed her mother on the cheek. The scene of mother and daughter snuggling together was very heartwarming. Ning Xuema didn't know how many similar scenes she had seen in the past. Originally, she didn't feel anything, but now, she felt warmth in her heart. She couldn't help but stroke her lower abdomen. She was also pregnant with a baby. A few months later, she would be born too. She seemed to have seen the day of the baby's birth. She could not help but smile again. Before she transmigrated, she advocated the idea of being single. She felt that it was good to be alone, free as the wind. She was not tied down by anyone or anything. Now, she had an extra sweet burden. She just needed to find her child's father and reunite with her family. However, she had returned to this world. How was she going to leave? The doors of time and space here seemed to be different from those of other places. Ning Xuema originally wanted to fly around in the sky and look for other doors of time and space. Later, she thought that since it was rare for her to return to her own world, she might as well visit her friends. She was actually very curious about how her friends dealt with her when she fell asleep and could not wake up. Was her body still alive in the modern world? With these questions in mind, she quickly determined the coordinates of her location and then flew towards her old home. Her old home was a rather picturesque residential area. Naturally, she saw many familiar things along the way. The city's neon lights were twinkling, the river of cars that flowed like stars, the bright street lights, the city's street gardens, and the crowds of people dressed up in various colors wandering in the night. Everything was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. She never knew that she could be so homesick. She could not tell if she was sad or happy when she returned to her hometown. There were all kinds of feelings in her heart. She was not in a hurry to go home. Instead, she strolled along the streets, looking at the lights, the buildings, and the people. After she had seen enough, she slowly returned to her home. The residential area was still the same residential area. Even the security guards were still the same. Nothing had changed. It was as if she had never left. She had already looked at the calendar. It had only been a year since she transmigrated. A year's time was nothing to most people. However, to Ning Xuema it felt like a century. She felt that she was already out of touch with this society. She didn't want to reveal herself, so she went back into her unit. The door was locked. The decoration of the door was the same, but the lock had been changed. Her heart sank. She turned invisible and opened the door. Then she stood there, unable to describe her feelings. Nothing in the house had changed. Her furniture, her dolls, everything was still there. Even the aquarium-like water wall by the door was still there. The map fish were still swimming happily in the tank. The house was very clean, as if she was still living here and had never left. She walked into the bedroom and looked at her big bed. The bed was still there. She clearly remembered that she had bought this bed before she had transmigrated. She liked the bed's antique texture and color, so she had bought it at a high price. However, he didn't expect that he would transmigrate after sleeping on it for one night. The bed was still there, and even the bedding was the one she used to sleep on. It was neatly folded and naturally her body was not on it. Chapter 14:12. Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief. She thought that she could see her sleeping beauty in this room. Perhaps she was already dead in this world? Otherwise, it was impossible for the owner to change. She walked around the room and found other girls' clothes, shoes, hats, cosmetics, skincare products, and other sundries. Obviously, the current owner of this place was also a girl. Ning Xuema slowly sat on the sofa and looked at everything here. She was lost in thought for a moment. The door was locked, and the door was opened again. A pretty girl dressed casually and looked lazy walked in. She looked to be about 20 years old and looked unfamiliar. Ning Xuema did not know her. The girl was shocked when she came in. Then, her eyes fell on the sofa and she pursed her lips. "Who's there?" Ning Xuema was a little surprised. She was invisible. How could the girl see her? The girl took 2 steps forward and stood less than 4 feet in front of Ning Xuema. "Show yourself. I know you're a girl like me. Are you the original owner?" Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and showed herself. "How did you guess?" The girl took a step back, and her bright eyes looked at Ning Xuema. "It's really the original owner. You're even prettier than the photo. Did you die unjustly? Do you have something on your mind this time?" It turned out that she thought she was a ghost. She could talk to her calmly as a ghost. This girl was not simple. Ning Xuema talked with her for a while and figured out the girl's background. Her name was Bai Yin. She was a top student from the Academy of Medical Sciences. She had just graduated with a doctorate in forensic science. From Bai Yin's mouth, Ning Xuema found out what had happened to her after she transmigrated. A year ago, she had died in her bed. At that time, it had caused quite an uproar. If it weren't for her friend who stopped them, her corpse would have been taken to the forensic laboratory for an autopsy. Bai Yin happened to pass by the place when she was looking for a house. It was rare for her to join in the fun. She went forward and saw that she died of sudden cardiac death. "You have a lot of friends." A lot of people came that day. They were all sad and crying. Bai Yin summed up the situation at that time. "Where's my corpse?" Ning Xuema had a strange feeling. In just a few days, she actually saw herself die twice. In the previous life, Shui Emo, in this life, Ning Xuema. Your friend carried you into the helicopter and took you away. The young man who flew the helicopter cried the loudest. He carried you up directly and didn't let anyone touch you. He looked like he was going to fight anyone who touched you. Ning Xuema was speechless. She had already guessed who had taken her body. It was her most loyal subordinate, a baby-faced sharpshooter, who was also a mechanical genius. He was somewhat arrogant and had once brazenly chased after her. Even after being cut by her a few times, he was still unyielding. Ning Xuema's deepest impression of him was when he confessed to her while flying a helicopter at sea. He said that if she didn't agree, he would take her into the sea and commit suicide with her. Before he could finish his threat, Ning Xuema directly kicked him down and made him take a bath. That guy had a kind of obsession with her. After she died, would her body be taken away by him as a specimen and put at home? With that guy's nature, he would definitely do it. However, her other subordinates wouldn't agree, right? Ning Xuema was not sure. Chapter 14:13. Ning Xuema looked at Bai Yin from head to toe. "You know that the owner of this house died suddenly. How dare you come and live here? Did they sell this house to you?" Bai Yin smiled. "I'm not afraid of ghosts. Besides, your house is cheap. I'm poor. Your friend rented it to me. His only request is that he doesn't change anything in this house." You're not just a forensic doctor, are you? Ning Xuema looked at her. Bai Yin thought for a while and handed her a business card. This is my second profession. If you need anything, please take care of me. Ning Xuema looked at the business card and finally knew her second identity. She was an exorcist from the Bai clan. No wonder she was so bold and not afraid of ghosts. She knew that the Bai clan was on par with the Yi clan of exorcists. The difference was that the Yi clan only accepted disciples with different surnames, while the Bai clan only passed it down to females. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and looked at her. Do you think I'm a ghost? Bai Yin shook her head. No, but you're not a real person. Your aura is very similar to my friend's. Did you travel through time? Soul travel? Ning Xuema was speechless. Was traveling through time as common as eating cabbage these days? Bai Yin probably read the curiosity in Ning Xuema's eyes. She smiled. Don't be surprised. I have a few friends who can travel through time and space freely, so they're more familiar with this. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Travel through time and space freely. Did that mean she didn't need to look for the space door and could travel back directly? She chatted with Bai Yin for a while. She learned from Bai Yin that her friends who could travel through time and space freely relied on something called the reincarnation disc. Although her era was good, Ning Xuema was anxious to go home. She still had to find the Almighty. She was afraid that something would happen if she was late. Ning Xuema didn't want to beat around the bush. She immediately expressed her interest in the reincarnation disc and hoped to buy one. Bai Yin was also a straightforward person. He nodded and agreed, saying that he would contact them for her. It was easy for girls to become friends. As a former agent, Ning Xuema had a good impression of this girl, named Bai Yin, even though she was more cautious. Subconsciously, she felt that she could be friends with her. Her sixth sense had never been wrong, so after chatting for a while, the two of them became friends. Half an hour later, the two of them sat at the dining table and started eating supper. The takeout that Bai Yin ordered was very delicious. Coincidentally, it also suited Ning Xuema's taste. She hadn't eaten anything from this era for a long time. Now that she was eating it again and tasting that familiar taste, she had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Bai Yin opened a bottle of red wine and was about to pour it for her. Ning Xuema waved her hand. I can't drink now. Bai Yin's eyes lit up. Are you pregnant? This little girl was really extraordinarily smart. Ning Xuema nodded. Bai Yin's eyes were even brighter. You want to travel back so urgently because you can't bear to leave the child's father? Ning Xuema smiled and didn't avoid it. Yes, I can't leave him. Then how did you travel back? Does your husband know? Ning Xuema paused and shook her head. It was a coincidence that I traveled back. He doesn't know. Oh, then he will probably go crazy looking for you. Bai Yin took a sip of wine and wrung her hands. Ning Xuema smiled and didn't say anything. She felt a little bitter in her heart. Would Shenjuli look for her? Probably no way. Chapter 14:14. The two of them chatted for a while. At night, Ning Xuema stayed here. After all, it used to be her house, so she slept soundly. Bai Yin smiled and said, I didn't touch anything in your house, and I didn't dare to sleep on the big bed. I've been sleeping in the guest room next door. If you need anything, just call me. Ning Xuema naturally agreed, and the two of them went to sleep. Outside, the sky was full of stars. Ning Xuema lay on the big bed. She was obviously very tired, but she didn't feel sleepy at all. After tossing and turning for a while, she placed her hands on her stomach and sighed softly. Baby, maybe I can bring you to see him tomorrow. I wonder how he will react when he finds out about your existence. She thought about Shenjuli's possible reaction and realized that she couldn't think of anything. She sighed again, hugged the blanket and rolled around. She continued to talk to the baby in her stomach. I don't know if he will believe my explanation. Damn it, dealing with people who have lost their memories is really troublesome. Oh right, he has the ability to read people's memories. When the time comes, I'll let him read it. Maybe everything will be solved. Thinking of this, Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief. She pursed her lips and felt a little wronged. Actually, he has let me down. After everything is explained, I'll make him beg me to stay. If he continues to be arrogant, I'll ignore him. Baby, I'll take you far away. Her stomach moved again, as if the baby in her stomach was echoing her. Ning Xuema was in a good mood. She rubbed her stomach gently. Baby, you're really mommy's considerate little jacket. Are you a boy or a girl? She thought for a while and simply used her inner vision to check the baby in her stomach. After a while, she gave up. The baby in her stomach was too small, and she couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. However, since it was so considerate, it should be a girl, right? She thought for a while, but she still couldn't get sleepy. She looked up at her watch. It was almost midnight. A pregnant person couldn't stay up late. Otherwise, it would be bad for the baby in her stomach. Yes, she needed to sleep. The baby would only be healthy if she had enough sleep. She closed her eyes, emptied her mind, and began to cultivate sleep. After all, she had practiced meditation before, so it wasn't too difficult to cultivate her sleepiness. An hour later, she finally succeeded in waking up and shaking hands with him. Before she fell asleep, she vaguely wondered if she would be able to dream about him this time. The green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, the mountains and rivers were beautiful, and the trees towered into the sky. Clouds and mist constantly swirled around their feet, making it seem like a paradise for immortals. Ning Xuema stood on the grass in a daze. Where was this place? She couldn't help but walk forward. There were all kinds of foxes in the clouds. Some were white, some were red, and some were green. Some had 6 tails, and some had 8 tails. It was very beautiful. Had he fallen into a fox's den? So many foxes. Ning Xuema browsed the scenery as she walked. Suddenly, there was a clear voice in front of her. There's someone here. After this call, the big and small foxes that were laughing and chasing each other on the grass suddenly changed into their human forms. There were men and women, young and old, and all of them were very beautiful. Where is it? Where is it? What kind of person is it? They all laughed and ran towards the place where the voice came from. It turned out that these foxes had all cultivated into human forms. Did he end up in a Chinese studio? There were so many fox spirits. Ning Xuema thought for a while and ran over. Chapter 14-15. In front of her, men and women were gathered in a circle, chattering away. It was very lively. It's a man. He's so beautiful. Yes, he's even more beautiful than the most beautiful Yin Jiochin here. Hey, he's injured. There's a lot of blood on his robe. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Since no one here could see her, she simply squeezed into the crowd to take a look. She finally saw the injured man who was surrounded by the crowd. Her whole body froze there. Shenjuli, the person lying there with his eyes closed, was actually Shenjuli. His face was a little pale, and there were bloodstains on the bottom of his snow-white robe. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. He had already fainted, so he didn't know that he was surrounded by a group of vixens. Ning Xuema stared at the bloodstains on his white robe. She couldn't wait to lift up his robe to take a look and see how serious his injury was. The injury seemed to be on his abdomen. Could it be because she had stabbed him with the knife? Ning Xuema's hands and feet were a little cold. She steeled her heart and rushed over to his side. She raised her hand to touch the wound under his white robe, but her fingers brushed past his body. She could see him, but she couldn't touch him. She was very anxious and raised her hand again. Before she could touch his robe, she suddenly heard someone shout, "Oh, he's awake!" Ning Xuema's hand trembled. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at his face. Sure enough, she saw his eyelashes tremble slightly, and he slowly opened his eyes. That pair of deep blue eyes were like the sea, and they met with Ning Xuema's eyes. Ning Xuema's heart was beating like thunder. She opened her mouth, but found that she couldn't make a sound. She was anxious. Everything in front of her dissipated, and she woke up from her dream. She raised her hand to touch her forehead. Her forehead was full of sweat, and the blanket was a little thick. She sat up, and her heart was still beating fast. She actually dreamed of him, and she even dreamed that he was seriously injured. Some people said that dreams were the result of overthinking. She probably had some lingering thoughts after stabbing him with the knife, which was why she dreamed of this. It couldn't be real. With Shenjuli's great ability, he didn't even stab him in the vital parts. With his ability, it would be a matter of minutes for him to recover. He would never be in such a sorry state. Moreover, even if he was injured, he was in the immortal nation. How could he fall into the fox's den? A dream. It was indeed a dream. She was probably afraid that he would be seduced by the vixen, and she felt guilty about stabbing him with the knife. Under the influence of these two factors, she had such a dream. Although she thought so, she still couldn't let it go. Her heart was burning, and she couldn't wait to rush to Tianyin Peak. Ning Xuema thought that as long as she got the samsara disc, it would be easy to travel back. She didn't expect that things were far from as simple as she thought. Bai Yin had indeed brought her the wheel of samsara. Not only had he brought her the wheel of samsara, but he had also brought along a renowned exorcist. It was said that he was a fox immortal who had traveled through countless space-time. He had a slightly feminine name, Hua Baoyue. This exorcist was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that one couldn't tell his gender. He looked flamboyant, and his personality was also flamboyant. The moment he entered, his pair of watery peach blossom eyes fell on Ning Xuema. He looked her up and down. "Little girl, are you the one who wants to travel through space-time? You want the wheel of samsara?" Ning Xuema. If Bai Yin hadn't introduced him in advance, Ning Xuema would have thought that this exorcist, Hua Baoyue, was a charlatan who sold wild herbs. Chapter 14:16. Ning Xuema nodded and answered simply, "Yes, I want to travel back to that era." Hua Baoyue smiled brightly and sat down on the sofa. "Come, tell me, which era do you want to travel to? How many years from now? It's best to confirm the month and day, so that it can be accurate." Ning Xuema was speechless. She couldn't say it. The world she traveled to wasn't any era in history. She didn't even know if that era was before or after this one, let alone what year it was. Hua Baoyue looked at her expression and seemed to understand something. "It's not in history." Ning Xuema nodded. "Ah." Hua Baoyue frowned slightly. "It doesn't matter. Let me ask you, what was the color of the whirlpool before you traveled? I can estimate the general age based on the color of the whirlpool. There shouldn't be a difference of 2 or 3 years." Ning Xuema was confused. "What whirlpool? I was sleeping and my soul traveled. When I woke up, I was in that era." Hua Baoyue was speechless. He coughed. "So it's soul transmigration. This is a little troublesome, and the cost should be higher." He turned to ask Bai Yin, "Little Bai, have you negotiated the price with her?" Bai Yin said, "No, she's the original owner of this house. Brother Hua, I hit it off with her the moment I met her. Please help her this time." Hua Baoyue looked at the layout of the house, and then at Ning Xuema. "So you're the lady who suddenly died in this house. Well, since Xiaobai is living here and the rent is cheap, I'll give you a discount. After it's done, you can mortgage this house to me as payment." Ning Xuema was speechless. Was this guy not a fraud? He said it so casually. Her house was 180 square meters in a high-end neighborhood. The average price was 200,000 yuan per square meter. He was still considered cheap for a property worth tens of millions? Was this guy sure he had a reincarnation disc? Was he just making a trap to trick her into giving up her house? What kind of person was Hua Baoyue? He was a master. With just a glance from Ning Xuema, he could guess what she was thinking. He smiled and took out a black compass from his pocket. He weighed it in his palm and said, "I, Hua Baoyue, have always been honest when doing business. The cost of making the samsara disc was high, and it consumed a lot of spiritual power. Each side was sold for at least 50 million yuan, and that was in the famous era in history. I sold the highest one for 100 million, and sent it straight to the Jurassic period." Ning Xuema's lips twitched. "Are you a transmigrator?" There were so many rich people now. If there really was such a company, there would definitely be many people who would want to spend a lot of money to try it out. Would the sky of history be pierced into a sieve? Would there be as many transmigrators as dumplings? Hua Baoyue smiled and said, "My reincarnation will only reincarnates those who are fated. It's not just about money." He still had to follow the rules of history. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a mess? Hua Baoyue's smile was like a flower blooming in spring. It could almost dazzle people's eyes. 2 words instantly appeared in Ning Xuema's mind. Evildoer. She didn't expect that there would be such a handsome man in her era. He was almost as handsome as Shenjuli. Thinking of this name, she felt warm and sour in her heart. She took a deep breath. She just wanted to go back and tell Shenjuli everything. Chapter 14:17. She no longer cared about the houses of this era. She only suspected that Hua Baoyue had the means to do so. Ning Xuema looked at the reincarnation disc in Hua Baoyue's hand and felt the spiritual power surging in it. She talked with Hua Baoyue for a while. Hua Baoyue was eloquent and answered every question. Ning Xuema was also a negotiator. After a while, Ning Xuema was finally sure that what Hua Baoyue said was true. In order to go back, she took the risk. Hua Baoyue was obviously well prepared. She even brought the contract. Both parties agreed that if Hua Baoyue achieved Ning Xuema's goal, the house would belong to Hua Baoyue after a month. On the other hand, not only would Hua Baoyue not get the house, but she would also have to pay Ning Xuema 30 million yuan. Ning Xuema had her own plans. If she successfully transmigrated, she would not come back. The contract would take effect. If she did not succeed, she could go back on her words. This contract was indeed fair and honest to both the old and the young, and Bai Yun was the witness of their contract. After both parties had reached an agreement, Hua Baoyue smiled and looked at Ning Xuema. "Is this your body after you transmigrated?" Ning Xuema nodded. "How is it different from your original body?" "We look the same. Only the age is different." Ning Xuema explained the situation of her cultivation in the other world. Hua Baoyue's eyes moved slightly. She stood up and walked around her. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, "This body is actually yours." Ning Xuema asked, "How do you know?" "Your aura is very compatible with this body. It doesn't look like it can be possessed. Only your original body can achieve such a level of compatibility. But I was possessed. This body was only 13 years old. It was short and skinny." Ning Xuema obviously did not believe her. Hua Baoyue shook her head. "I don't know exactly what happened. It seems like someone changed your body for you over there. Maybe you were someone else's body when you crossed over, but you weren't." Ning Xuema was stunned. She remembered that she had taken a bath in Han Shanyue's celestial master residence and had grown several years older. Could it be that Shenjuli's hot spring had this function? Hua Baoyue knocked on the table with a serious face. Come, tell me about that era, the customs, the people, the clothes, the habits. The more detailed, the better. This will make it easier for me to make the right judgment." This was not a problem for Ning Xuema. Besides, there was nothing to hide. She had done a lot of homework there and knew the local customs and customs of that continent like the back of her hand. So she told him about it. Of course, she mainly talked about the shape of the continent, its structure, the layout of the country, and so on. She rarely talked about personal matters. The more Hua Baoyue listened, the more his brows furrowed. When Ning Xuema finished, he sat there and pondered for a long time. Ning Xuema did not understand Hua Baoyue's personality, but Bai Yin did. She finally interrupted. "Brother Hua, what's the problem?" Hua Baoyue sighed slightly and looked at Ning Xuema again. "Your crossing over is a bit unreliable." Ning Xuema did not speak. She listened to his explanation with Bai Yun. When Hua Baoyue finished, not only was Bai Yun stunned, but even Ning Xuema felt like she had been struck by lightning. It was just as Hua Baoyue had suspected. Her crossing over was very strange. Chapter 14:18. According to Hua Baoyue, she didn't travel to the historical time and space, nor was it Earth, but another world. There were countless galaxies in the universe, and not only Earth had life. This was a fact that everyone knew. Hua Baoyue had been studying Earth's history all these years. He had traveled countless times with the reincarnation disc, and he had even been to the era when Earth was just formed. It could be said that no one knew Earth's history better than him, including those that had no written records and those that had been drowned by history. He might not know the specific events of each period, but he knew the outline of Earth's continents in each period. He had never seen the shape of the continent that Ning Xuema mentioned on Earth. Not in any period. So the place she traveled to should be a planet in outer space similar to Earth, or even beyond any galaxy he knew. It was a system of its own. Gods and immortals had nothing to do with this world. There was even more than one celestial emperor. It had nothing to do with the world here. Ning Xuema listened to him and was stunned for a moment. She couldn't believe it. No way. Although the structure of the continent there is different from the one here. I can see the sun, the moon, and the stars. They even speak Chinese. If it's not Earth, it can't be so similar. Hua Baoyue was also thinking, have you heard of the mirror world? Ah. Ning Xuema was confused. Hua Baoyue sighed. Legend has it that everything in this world comes in pairs. It's the same for planets. If there is an Earth, there will be a pseudo-Earth that is extremely similar to it, just like what you see in a mirror. But they don't appear in the same place, but in two different spaces. These two spaces are not connected, and you won't see them in the starry sky. They don't even know each other's existence. Occasionally, there will be a huge change in the magnetic field, and a passage will appear between the two spaces, such as a whirlpool, a black hole, etc. Once it appears, it will suck away things that happen to appear nearby. This way, things in one space will be sucked into another space. Hua Baoyue seemed to have studied a lot about the starry sky. The two ladies present were a little confused. Bai Yun heard this and asked directly, Brother Hua, you're not fooling us, are you? You said Sister Ning traveled to the mirror? Hua Baoyue touched her chin and said, Wrong, it's the mirror world, not the mirror. I didn't believe it at first, but after seeing what happened to her, I believe it. His gaze returned to Ning Xuema's face. Miss Ning, did you discover anything strange when you were searching for the spatial door? Ning Xuema thought for a while. She vaguely remembered that when she left the planet where her previous body was sealed, the sky seemed to have suddenly darkened when she flew into the sky. However, she was distracted at that time and did not notice it. Later, she accidentally saw a meteorite belt and stopped to scatter the ashes. Then she fell into a trance. When he came to his senses, he realized that everything had changed. Could it be that he had inadvertently returned to the space that belonged to this side at that time, and then found a spatial door to return to his own era? Although Hua Baoyue's explanation was unimaginable, it did not seem to be implausible. Besides, Ning Xuema's main concern wasn't this but another problem. Chapter 1419. Mr. Hua, can I go back through your reincarnation disc? Hua Baoyue looked at her with his peach blossom eyes and answered, Extremely difficult. Ning Xuema was speechless. Then the original contract was for nothing. She didn't give up. Then there should be hope, right? Hua Baoyue seemed to be in a difficult position. He stood up and walked around the room. Bai Yin had known him for many years, but this was the first time she saw him so serious. She was drinking tea leisurely, but now she stopped drinking. Her eyes followed him and she couldn't help but ask, How difficult is it? Hua Baoyue didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to Ning Xuema. I advise you to give up on this idea. I'm not doing this business. Ning Xuema was speechless. Her face was slightly pale. She took a breath and asked, Why? Hua Baoyue said, My reincarnation disc can only go through the different eras on Earth. It can't go through the mirror world. You can't go back. Can't go back? She couldn't go back. Ning Xuema's fingers were cold. Shen Juli's shadow appeared in her mind. Were they really not meant to be together? She would never be able to see him again? No. Impossible. There must be a way. She looked at Hua Baoyue. Mr. Hua, you said it was extremely difficult, but it doesn't mean there is no hope, right? Hua Baoyue didn't look at her anymore. He walked away. No, there is no hope. You'd better give up. She turned around and disappeared. Ning Xuema was speechless. She sat down slowly and didn't say a word. Bai Yin didn't expect Hua Baoyue to leave so quickly. She was also stunned. After thinking for a while, she comforted Ning Xuema. Xuema, actually you don't have to go back to that era. Think about it, that era was so backward. They had old-fashioned thinking polygamy, no heating in winter, no air conditioning in summer. She talked a lot about the disadvantages of that era. Ning Xuema closed her eyes slightly. Her heart was bitter. She was never interested in that era. When she first transmigrated there, she tried every possible way to escape. Even in her dreams, she wanted to return to her own era. However, Ever since she met that person and fell in love with him, she had already treated him as her home. Wherever he was, that was where her heart belonged. So, she loved him to this extent. So, he was already so deep in the mud that he couldn't escape unscathed. Shinjuli. Shinjuli. Do you miss me too? Could it be? You don't even know I'm pregnant with your child. In order to give Ning Xuema some relief, Bai Yin simply took her out to play. Shopping, dancing, karaoke, shopping, watching movies. As long as the girl was interested in something, she would bring her to play and shop. He wanted her to experience the benefits of living in modern times and not think about that backward place. From time to time, he would advise her to learn to look forward, to learn to follow fate, and to cherish the present. What was love? Who in modern times still believed in love? What was the 7-year itch for people who loved each other so much before marriage? There were plenty of people who loved each other so much before marriage and fought until their heads bled after marriage. What was the point of thinking about an ancient man? No matter how good an ancient man was, he was still an ancient man. The feudal thinking in his bones wouldn't change. In short, he kept telling her the benefits of staying in modern times and the inconvenience of returning to that ancient era. Chapter 1420. Finally, she thought of a ruthless advice. Xuema, think about it. You are pregnant now. Giving birth to a baby in ancient times was a deadly thing. If you are not careful, you will have a difficult labor. If you are not careful, you will lose your life. Unlike here, where science is so advanced, if the baby does not go well, you can still have a C-section. Bai Yin was very enthusiastic, and it was indeed for her own good. Ning Xuema understood all these. She also understood all these reasons, but her heart was like a string, and the other end of the string was in Shenjuli's hands. No matter where she flew, her heart was still controlled by him. If it was in the past, she would definitely persuade him to let go. It was not easy to find a two-legged toad in this world, but there were plenty of two-legged men. She also felt that she was too unrestrained, and not like her character in the past. Shenjuli still misunderstood her. Shenjuli even hurt her. Shenjuli even cooked her. She desperately thought of all the bad things about him, and all the things that he had done wrong to her. However, she still could not let go. She must have been poisoned by his venomous spell. It must be. She thought about it for 2 days, and the more she thought about it, the more unwilling she felt. Therefore, she still had to find a way to go back. She still had to find him. He was the only one who could cure this venomous spell. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would not be able to rest in peace for the rest of her life. Since the reincarnation disc was not working, she would try another way. After all, this was how she came back. Maybe she could use the same method to go back. Bai Yin, I must go back, no matter what the price. Ning Xuema said this and turned to leave. From then on, Ning Xuema searched the sky again, looking for the space-time door. She was flying very fast now. In a month, she had almost gone to all the areas on Earth that were said to have space-time doors. But there was none. She did not know if it was because there were too few space-time doors in this era, or the method she was looking for was wrong. In short, she did not find anything in a month. The world was long, and the sea of people was vast. They were in this world, and they were still alive in this world. However, she could not find him, nor could she find the way home. The seawater below was churning, and seabirds were flying in the sky. Ning Xuema floated in the air, her heart cold. This was the last place she knew she had to look for. But she still couldn't find it. She had always been strong, and did not shed tears easily. But now, she cried as she looked at the setting sun in the sky. She cried like a lost child. These days, the baby in her belly probably knew that she was not in a good mood, and did not dare to disturb her, so it had been staying there quietly. Occasionally, when Ning Xuema stroked it, it moved a little to show that it was fine. Other times, it was almost motionless, even more obedient than a chick in its eggshell. Ning Xuema had been depressed for the past few days, but she couldn't find a way to vent her feelings. Now that she had started crying, she could no longer hold it in. Anyway, this was a no man's land, and no one was here to watch her. So she simply let go of her tears. Shinjuli, you bastard. Shinjuli, I miss you. Shinjuli, why didn't you come to me? Aren't you an omnipotent god? Why didn't you guess that I couldn't go back? Why didn't you come to pick me up? I can't go back. She cried loudly, sobbing so hard that she could not speak. She cried until her head was dizzy, and she cried until she could not find her bearings. Why are you so stubborn? A voice suddenly sounded not far behind her. Chapter 14:21. Why are you so persistent? A voice suddenly sounded not far behind her. The voice was magnetic, pleasant, and very familiar. Ning Xuema was shocked and turned around. A man was standing behind her. He was wearing a white robe and had silver hair. His face was handsome, and his peach blossom eyes were glittering. Hua Baowe. He was not wearing modern clothes today, but an ancient white robe. His hair was also tied up in an ancient style. He raised his hand and threw a pack of tissue to her. Come, wipe your face first. No matter how beautiful a woman is, she doesn't look good when she cries. Ning Xuemo rarely cried freely. She didn't expect to fall into this person's eyes. She was a little embarrassed and took the tissue without hesitation. She wiped her face and adjusted her mood while she was at it. Hua Baowe didn't say anything. He crossed his arms and looked at the sunset patiently. When a girl cried, you either coaxed her or didn't look at her. You just couldn't stare at her. Are you really a fox immortal? Ning Xuemo quickly adjusted. She didn't want anyone to see her crying and her weakness, including this charlatan-like exorcist in front of her. Hua Baowe was also happy. His body flashed with white light, and 9 fox tails appeared, swaying behind him. 9-tailed fox. He was also a 9-tailed fox. Ning Xuemo remembered her previous life. Snowy Emo was also a 9-tailed silver fox. But in order to win the position of the demon lord, she changed her skin to red. You're a demon. Can a demon be an exorcist? Thanks to her previous life, Ning Xuema felt that 9-tailed foxes should be demons or demons. Hua Baowe raised his eyebrows. Demon? You think I have a demon aura? Ning Xuema shook her head. No. She felt that he had an immortal aura. Hua Baowe nodded with satisfaction, his peach blossom eyes shining. That's it. I'm a 9-tailed fairy fox. I'm an immortal. They were both 9-tailed foxes, but why was the difference so big? Ning Xuemo couldn't help but sigh for her previous life. If Snowy Emo could also cultivate, how could there be such a mess later? Of course, Ning Xuemo wouldn't exist either. Ning Xuemo looked at Hua Baowe from head to toe. She did not expect that there would be immortals living in this era, among the masses. After figuring out Hua Baowe's identity, Ning Xuema no longer treated Hua Baowe as a scammer. Have you been following me recently? Hua Baowe did not answer her question. Instead, she sighed and said, I have a bad habit. I can't bear to see those who are infatuated. Ning Xuema looked at him without saying anything. Hua Baowe looked at the setting sun again. Besides, that girl Bai Yin is very obsessed with your house. I owe her a favor, so I had to come out and find you. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat, and her eyes lit up. So you have a way. There is a way, but it's extremely dangerous. I don't recommend it. Hua Baowe finally turned around, his handsome face serious. The success rate is only 1%. If it doesn't work, you won't be able to go back to the place you want to go. And you won't be able to come back to this world. Maybe you'll become a piece of cosmic dust. And you won't even be able to reincarnate. Ning Xuema was speechless. Hua Baowe sighed. That's why I said there was no way. I wanted you to completely give up this idea. But I didn't expect you to be so persistent, looking everywhere for the space door. The space door in this world is mostly turbulent. Not to mention that you can't find it. Even if you find it, you can't blindly barge in. Because many of them are standard dead places. Once you enter, you won't even leave a whole body behind. Chapter 14:22. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and smiled bitterly in her heart. She was from this world, but she knew nothing about the secret rules of this world. Hua Baowe asked her, there are 2 paths in front of you. First, you can try my method, which has a 1% chance of success. Second, you can give up and go back. You can stay in this world and forget everything about the other world. You can start over. Don't go around blindly. Ning Xuema said without hesitation. I choose the first one. Hua Baoyue said. I think you should think about it again. I heard from Bai Yin that you are pregnant. Even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about the baby. Can you bear to let it die before it comes to this world? After all, the risk is great. Ning Xuema's body stiffened, and her fingers touched her belly. Hua Baoyue was right. She could risk it all, but what about her baby? Or she could wait until she gave birth to the baby, and then try the first step that Hua Baoyue mentioned. Hua Baoyue kept looking at her, and saw her expression. He knew that she was tempted and smiled. Let's think about it. You go back first. He knew what she was thinking, but he also knew that a woman's heart was basically made of water. After the baby was born, she would not bear to leave the baby. Maybe she would stay and not leave. It was better than letting her take such a big risk. As for her husband in the other world, he was not a good husband if he allowed his pregnant wife to wander around alone and get lost. Even if he was anxious, he deserved it. If Hua Baoyue's wife was pregnant, he would not leave her side at all times. Unfortunately, Lingxi had no intention of having a baby until now. He was lost in thought for a moment, and his eyes inadvertently looked at Ning Xuema's figure. His heart suddenly moved. How many months is your baby? Ning Xuema was startled and answered, 4 months and 10 days. She and Shen Jiuli had only had sex once, so she naturally remembered the date. Hua Baoyue frowned slightly, looked at her for a moment, and suddenly stepped forward. Give me your hand. Ning Xuema didn't know what he was up to. What are you doing? Hua Baoyue raised an eyebrow and said, At this point, you are still afraid that I will harm you? Haven't you heard of the Baoyue miracle doctor? Ning Xuema was taken aback. Naturally, she had heard of Baoyu before. His medical skills were top-notch in the world, but he was rather lazy and did not treat people easily. Moreover, he kept a low profile and never appeared in the news media. Not many people knew his true colors. Ning Xuema had only heard of his name, but had never seen him in person. Who would have thought that the legendary Baoyue miracle doctor was actually this exorcist in front of him? Now that she knew Hua Baoyue's other identity, Ning Xuema no longer hesitated. She reached out her hand to let him feel her pulse. Hua Baoyue's frown deepened. Ning Xuema was also a doctor, but after all, it was her first pregnancy. Originally, her main focus was to treat injuries, so she did not understand pregnancy. Looking at Hua Baoyue's expression, she was a little frightened. Is there anything wrong? Are you sure the date is correct? Yes. When did it have fetal movement? A month ago. How has it been recently? It has barely moved. Hua Baoyue did not speak, and his frown deepened. Ning Xuema looked at him. In the end, what's wrong? Just tell me. Hua Baoyue pondered for a moment and sighed. Your situation is a little strange. Your baby is not acclimatized in this world. Not acclimatized before it was born? Isn't this a little too ridiculous? Chapter 1423. If someone else had said that, Ning Xuema would not have believed it. However, the person in front of her was a mighty immortal and a miracle doctor. Under Ning Xuema's relentless questioning, Hua Baoyue finally revealed his inference. According to the norm, it would only start to move after 4 months. But you're already moving after 3 months. This proves that this baby is developing ahead of its time. Perhaps its father's identity is special? However, you have been in this world for a month. According to its growth pattern, it should have developed better and stronger, and its fetal movements should be more frequent. However, it is obviously not so. Not only has it not grown, but it seems to have shrunk a lot. I just checked your pulse. It seems that you are at most 2.5 months pregnant. Ning Xuema's face turned pale. It had not moved much recently. She thought it was being obedient. It turned out that it was getting smaller and smaller. If it stayed any longer, would the baby die in the womb? No, it might not be that it was not acclimatized. Perhaps it was because she had been looking for the space door frequently in the past month, and had not eaten or slept well. This delayed its growth. She told her inference. Hua Baoyue shook his head slowly. That may not be the reason. How about this? Let's go back first. You rest for a few days, and then we will see how the baby develops. This was indeed a good idea. Ning Xuema agreed. 5 days later, Hua Baiwa visited again. Ning Xuema had been staying at home for the past 5 days. She put aside all distracting thoughts and strictly followed the diet and rest schedule of a pregnant woman. Even if she did not have an appetite, she would eat some. She only hoped that the baby in her womb would be healthy. In the past 5 days, the baby's fetal movements were still very little. Even when it moved occasionally, it was very gentle. She even went to the hospital to do an ultrasound. After the doctor looked at the film, he said that her baby was about 2.5 months old. This made her very worried. Almost every half day, she would use her inner vision to check its size. It was really much smaller than it was a month ago. This made her feel very guilty. In the past few days, she ate and drank desperately, hoping to add some nutrition to it. However, it did not seem to be effective. After Hua Baiwa came again to check her pulse, he said the same thing. Her baby was indeed getting smaller every day. It seemed that her baby really had no fate with this modern society. If she continued to stay in this world, her baby might disappear before it was born. So, whether it was for the baby in her belly, or for herself, she had to go back. Hua Baiwa could not help but sigh. Xuema, what kind of husband did you find over there? This child actually grew in reverse in this world. What kind? He was just a god. Who would have thought that God's child would be fine no matter how much he struggled in the other world? But after coming to this world, he became weak and grew in reverse. It seemed that the children of God were not so strong in every world. Ning Xuema was also complaining in her heart. She did not want to delay any longer. I have to go back. Brother Hua, please think of something as soon as possible. Xuema, your body belongs to the other world. So, my method is to use your blood as a guide to open the path of reincarnation and send you back to the mirror world. However, it can only send you back to the starry sky over there. You still need to find a space door to go back. Also, because of some spells in the process, once this method is activated, there is no turning back. You will never be able to return to this world again. Knowing this, are you still sure you want to go back? Chapter 1424. Ning Xuema closed her eyes slightly. I'm sure. She liked her own world very much, but she wanted to return to his side and let her baby be born healthy. 5 stars parade. Ning Xuema didn't expect that Hua Baiwa would make such a big scene, and she didn't expect that he would call so many helpers. What was even rarer was that most of these helpers were extremely handsome. The gentle, elegant, and handsome Bai Zimo. The tall, handsome, and elegant Feng Qingyang. The lazy, frivolous, and evil Feng Shaosun. Plus, the casual Hua Baiwa with a smile on his lips. When these 4 men stood together, they could beat this Appa's legs by dozens of streets. These people each had their own style. If Ning Xuema hadn't been used to seeing handsome men in the other world, and had some aesthetic fatigue, she might have been dazzled by them. This time, among the helpers called by Hua Baiwa, there was only one woman. She looked to be 22 or 23 years old. She was cool and free, wearing a black dress and a windbreaker. She didn't wear many famous brands, but the cold temperament around her was unforgettable. She introduced herself to Ning Xuema first and said straightforwardly, "Hello, I'm Yilingxi. This time, I'll take charge of sending you back to the mirror world." Hua Baiwa should have told you all the pros and cons. It's not too late to regret now. Ning Xuema smiled and replied straightforwardly, "I won't regret it." She never regretted things that she had decided on. Yilingxi looked at her again, and a touch of admiration flashed through her eyes. Not every woman had this kind of courage. She gave up a comfortable life and took this kind of risk with a 1% hope. If she didn't succeed, she would die. She didn't know what kind of man in the other world made her so desperate. That man was really lucky to be loved by such a woman. She thought for a moment and stuffed a small red crystal stone into Ning Xuema's hand. "Take this. Maybe you'll need it in the most dangerous time." The small stone was only the size of a fingernail. It was heart-shaped and quite round, and it was slightly warm in her hand. Ning Xuema gave her thanks and solemnly put away the stone. This might be the only thing she could take away from this world. She would keep it until the end of time as a souvenir. The mountain wind was biting cold. This was the peak of Mount Everest. Ordinary people might find it difficult to move around in this kind of place. But for the few people present, the wind and snow here were not a problem. According to Lingxi, when they were casting spells, they needed to be absolutely focused. They couldn't allow any external interference, not even modern electromagnetic waves. Therefore, this place was the most suitable. In the wind and snow, the 5 of them sat in 5 different positions, with Ning Xuema sitting in the middle. When everything was ready, they began to cast their spells. 5 samsara discs shot out from the palms of each of the 5 people. They were all black samsara discs, but when they were shot out by the 5 people, their colors were completely different. They were divided into white, green, blue, red, and yellow. They should correspond to the 5 elements of yin and yang, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. 5 light waves carried the samsara discs of different colors and flew into the air. There, they spun rapidly according to the array. The 5-colored light was dazzling. Ning Xuema sat in the middle and stared at the 5-colored light above her head. She clenched her fists. A moment later, a golden vortex gradually appeared where the 5-colored light was spinning. Chapter 1425. Ning Xuema flew up and followed Lingxi's instructions. She flicked her 10 fingers, and a drop of blood flew from each fingertip into the whirlpool. The golden whirlpool suddenly emitted a golden red light. The light fell straight down and covered Ning Xuema. It spun rapidly for a moment before slowly disappearing. After a while, even the golden whirlpool disappeared, and the sky returned to normal. However, Ning Xuema's figure was nowhere to be seen. The 5 people slowly stopped. In an instant, the 5-sided reincarnation disc fell back into their hands. The 5 people's faces were slightly pale. It was obvious that activating this array consumed a lot of spiritual energy. Even with their abilities, they could not bear it. Hua Baoyue watched the whirlpool disappear and sighed. We didn't let her down. We actually succeeded. I didn't expect it to be so easy. Feng Xiaoxuan snorted. With the 5 of us in charge, what can't we succeed? Among the 5 of them, 1 was once the boss of the demon world. 2 were outstanding talents in the exorcism world. 1 was a Green Hill Fox immortal, and 1 was the daughter of Nuwa. They could be said to be the most powerful partners. Once they worked together, there were few things that could be difficult for them. This time, activating the ancient teleportation array was no exception. It was said that activating this array required 5 exalted immortals to work together for a 50% chance of success. Among them, only 3 were at this level. The other 2 could not do it. That was why Hua Baoyue said there was only a 1% chance. Even the researcher of this ancient array, Lingxi, did not expect to succeed so easily. She looked in the direction Ning Xuema disappeared in a daze for a moment. Suddenly she said, "Our easy success may have something to do with her physique." The other 4 people looked at her together. Hua Baoyue said, "Her physique? I've already checked. Her physique is indeed very good, but she hasn't become an immortal yet. Her skills should be about the same as Zimo and the others." The ancient array said that unless the person being teleported is an exalted immortal, there's a 100% chance of success. She's obviously not an exalted immortal. She's not even an immortal. It was rare for Feng Xiaoxuan to frown as well. To be honest, I always felt that she wasn't that simple. When he had first seen her, his heart had inexplicably trembled. Although this feeling was fleeting, it still surprised him greatly. Back then, even when he met the Heavenly Emperor, he did not have such a feeling. Hua Baoyue laughed and said, "Forget it. She has already left. There is no need to discuss her identity. Let's hope that she'll succeed and return to the man she loves." He hugged Lingxi and said, "Honey, you've done a great job this time. What do you want?" Lingxi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. "I heard that you took advantage of the situation to rob a property worth tens of millions. How can you say that I'm looting a burning house? I'm doing business fair and square. I earned it fair and square." You earned the property, But you want us to work hard for you. How are you going to repay us? Bai Zima was never one to lose out. He smiled at Hua Baoyue. His words were approved by the other two men. So 3 pairs of eyes looked at Hua Baoyue, waiting for him to give an explanation. Hua Baoyue had a headache. All of you are so rich that you're oozing with oil. Why do you still care about this sum? The 3 men expressed their concern at the same time. They wanted to find an opportunity to make money. It was their common hobby to find an opportunity to make money. Chapter 1426. In the end, it was agreed that Hua Baoyue would pay for the 3 men to tour the capital for 10 days. Only then did the matter settle down. The capital was expensive, and the cost of living was high. Moreover, the 3 men spent money like water and were greedy for pleasure. Therefore, in these 10 days, it would cost at least a few million yuan. Hua Baoyue felt the pinch. Yilingxi hugged his arm and said, "Why do you look so sad? Didn't you earn tens of millions? It's not too much to split a few million yuan, right?" Hua Baoyue sighed. "You don't know, but I didn't earn that property for myself. It was for Bai Yin." Then, he looked at Yilingxi worriedly, afraid that she would suspect that he was having an affair. Seeing that Yilingxi didn't have any suspicion, she was just a little puzzled. "Bai Yin has plans to live there for a long time?" Hua Baoyue nodded. "Yes, she likes it there, and wants to decorate it according to her own style." "Lingxi, don't think too much. I'm just returning a favor to Bai Yin." Yilingxi patted his shoulder. "The truth is that you think too much. I never thought too much about it. You can do what you need to do. You don't have to explain to me." Then, she turned around and talked to the 3 men walking in front of her. The 4 of them discussed where to go and what kind of hotel to stay in. Hua Baoyue sighed. His Lingxi trusted him too much. He actually hoped that she would be jealous. In the jagged and floating asteroid belt, there was an orange-red planet shining faintly in the distance. When Ning Xuema saw this familiar scene, her legs suddenly went soft, and her eyes became sore and astringent. She finally found a familiar landmark. After floating in space for an unknown amount of time, she finally found the way home. Hua Baoyue was right. They did send her back to the mirror world. The mirror world was also vast and boundless. When she returned to the mirror world, she was also at a loss. Because she couldn't find the familiar scenery, she was still in the starry sky. At this point, she could only search with all her might. Fortunately, the spatial gates of this world were relatively easy to find. During this period, she entered 5 spatial gates and went to 5 planets. 2 of them had life forms, which meant that she could take a break and recover her strength. When she recovered more or less, she continued to search. There was no concept of time in outer space. She herself did not know how long she had been traveling. At the last time, she had just returned from a barren land. She did not replenish the psychokinesis needed to breathe in time. Her psychokinesis was in danger. Seeing that she was about to suffocate, she finally found another space door. After passing through that space door, she arrived here. The moment she saw the scenery here, she let out a long sigh of relief. The orange-red planet in the distance was where the immortal nation was located. As long as she could see it, she would be able to determine the route she needed to take back to the heavenly blessing continent. She would be able to go to the Sun-Moon sect and look for him. She finally saw hope. "Baby, we are finally back. Baby, I finally succeeded in getting you back to the place where you grew up. Are you happy?" Ning Xuema's palm gently caressed her lower abdomen as she used her thoughts to chat with the child. She had relied on this as her mental support to survive until now while she had been searching for a way out. Chapter 1427. She raised her hand and touched her face. There were all kinds of harmful rays in space. In order to save her energy to look for the space door, she didn't set up a barrier around her body. She only used a small amount of psychokinesis to protect her belly, to prevent her baby from getting hurt. In this way, her skin inevitably became rough and was no longer as delicate as before. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know that she probably looked like a haggard old woman. She couldn't be that beautiful, and might even be ugly. However, as long as she could come back, she was satisfied. The problem with her rough skin could be recovered after a few days of careful maintenance. When she returned to the ground, she first went to the immortal kingdom to recover her psychokinesis and physical strength. Then, she used her inner vision to look at her baby in her belly. Her baby was very strong. She had been in space for so long, but it didn't become smaller. It even showed signs of becoming lively again. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the creatures in the different time and space were compatible with each other. She could live well in her own time, but her baby couldn't. Could it be that the pollution on Earth was too serious? Was it the effect of the smog? Ning Xuema guessed unkindly. However, it was strange. Her current body was compatible with both time and space. When she first transmigrated, other than complaining about their system, her body didn't feel any other discomfort. She was indeed the most resilient. Since she was already here, she wasn't in a hurry. She had been to the immortal kingdom a few times before. But every time, she came with someone else. Now she was alone. Actually, it wasn't bad to be alone on the streets. She was free and did whatever she wanted. The things in the immortal kingdom were famous for being exquisite. When Ning Xuema first came here, she liked to buy some jewelry, clothes, and all kinds of delicious food. Now she wanted to buy some children's things. After walking around, she couldn't find a store that sold children's products. Then, she remembered that the people in this country didn't age or die. They didn't have children either. Naturally, they wouldn't sell such things. However, she could go to a clothing store to customize. The people here were clever. As long as she told them the size and style, they would definitely be able to make it. Ning Xuema was the kind of person who would do what she thought. She immediately went to a clothing store and found a tailor to customize children's clothes. Although the tailor felt that it was strange, after seeing Ning Xuema's personally drawn measurements, he straightforwardly accepted the job. Ning Xuema was rich now, so she was naturally very rich. She ordered more than 10 sets of clothes in all sizes, for both men and women. In this way, whether the baby in her belly was a boy or a girl, they would have beautiful clothes to wear when they were born. The material of the clothes here was extremely soft and smooth. It would be very comfortable for the baby to wear. The Almighty was so beautiful that he didn't seem human, and she was one of the most outstanding beauties. Her baby would definitely be heaven-defying. She wanted to dress them up as little angels and carry them out so that everyone would praise them and love them. Thinking of her future baby, Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile. No matter if it was a boy or a girl, her baby would definitely be the best. Shenjuli, I never thought that there would be a day when I would give birth to a little monkey for you. Seeing that you gave me such a good little steamed bun, elder sister will magnanimously forgive you for locking me up in the ice purgatory and throwing me into the cauldron without consulting me first. However, you have to make it up to me in the future. You have to be a good stay-at-home dad. You have to make the baby play. You have to make me happy. Chapter 1428. Thinking of Shenjuli taking care of the baby, Ning Xuema couldn't help but laugh. No matter how she thought about it, that image was out of place, but it made her heart overflow with warmth. The tailor in the shop looked at her curiously. Seeing her smile and her overflowing happiness, he couldn't help but smile too. It was said that happiness was contagious, and now it seemed that it was really contagious. It turned out that being a mother felt so good. She looked at Ning Xuema's figure again. Her figure was not out of shape at all, and she looked slim and slender. If it weren't for her custom-made clothes, and if it weren't for her calling him her little baby, no one would be able to tell that she was going to be a mother. Because the people of the immortal kingdom always made exquisite things, Ning Xuema had to wait for a month to collect the custom-made clothes. A month here was equivalent to a day in the Tianxi continent. Ning Xuema agreed happily, and discussed with the tailor the date to collect the clothes. She paid the deposit, and then walked out. She was now at the 9th level of the Earth rank. Although the storage space she cultivated was not as big as Shenjuli's, it could still store some miscellaneous things. Originally, her storage space was filled with elixirs, poisons, weapons, clothes, and the like. But now, her storage space was filled with some small items used by children. Hua Baowe said that every space had its own rules. It didn't allow her to bring modern things back to this era. Otherwise, there might be an accident on the way back. So she had to give up the toy guns, airplanes, dolls, electronic keyboards, and other modern toys that she had bought for her child. However, she had wrapped a few bags of diapers in her clothes. Hua Baowe turned a blind eye and let her get away with it. She made a large purchase in the Immortal Kingdom, and then went to a place with abundant spiritual energy to cultivate her spiritual force for 2 days. She also repaired her already rough skin. Only when she was more or less done with her preparations did she begin her journey back to the heavenly blessing continent. Homesickness was more timid. Ning Xuema deeply understood the meaning of these words, because she was now in this situation. Her return to the Tianxi continent this time went very smoothly. There were no twists and turns in the process. She was anxious to return home. She clearly wanted to go directly to the Sun Moon sect, but when she got close to the place, she became timid. She turned around and went to a small city near the Buddha Lotus Mountain first. The small city was affluent, and the common people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Streams of people flowed on the streets like colorful tides, and it was very lively. Ning Xuema had been to this small town countless times, so she knew the local conditions and customs well. Probably because it was close to Buddha Lotus Mountain, there were many people cultivating here. The atmosphere was usually peaceful and serene. This was the first time she had seen it so lively. Regardless of gender, everyone on the street was dressed in bright and beautiful clothes. The peddlers who were running around earlier were all wearing long gowns, and they looked refined and elegant as they hawked their wares. As for the shops along the street, each and every one of them was extremely clean. The signboards on the doors were shiny, as if they had been freshly painted. It was as if the entire city had been reborn. It was unbelievably clean and beautiful. The small city was very pleasing to the eye, but Ning Xuema was a little confused when she saw such a small city. What was wrong with this small city? Was there a new city lord who was obsessed with cleanliness? But even the city lord didn't have such great power to make the common people reborn to such an extent, right? Ning Xuema saw with her own eyes that there used to be a peddler with a loud voice who was elegantly hawking candied haws there. Chapter 1429. Ning Xuema saw with her own eyes that a hawker with a loud voice was elegantly hawking candied haws. Ning Xuema almost thought that this hawker was possessed by some scholar. She walked forward and bought a stick of candied haws. She asked casually, "Your candied haws are not bad. I've always liked to eat them, and have bought yours several times. I've always heard your loud voice, and it was easy to find you. What's wrong this time? Is your throat uncomfortable? You're dressed so handsomely. Are you looking for a wife?" That hawker laughed and even elegantly patted his long gown. "My throat is very good, but Miss Lizine doesn't like to be too noisy, so I can't hawk loudly anymore." "Lizine? Who is that?" Ning Xuema was confused. She asked tentatively, "Is Lizine the daughter or relative of the new city lord?" That hawker widened his eyes and sized up Ning Xuema. That gaze was as if he was looking at a monster. "Miss, you don't even know who Lizine is? Was this Miss Lizine very famous?" Ning Xuema replied that she had been traveling for a long time, and had only returned recently. She really didn't know who she was. That hawker shook his head repeatedly, and still had a look of disbelief. "Even if you're traveling, you should know this lady. Who on Tianxi continent doesn't know her?" Ning Xuema. She had only lost her way in space, and had actually become a country bumpkin when she came back? Who exactly was this Lizine? She was so famous that everyone knew her, and so many people had changed for her. She paused for a moment, and asked about the current age of the book. After that hawker replied, Ning Xuema instantly felt that she had experienced many vicissitudes of life. It had already been 10 years since she left Tianxi continent. 10 years. Another 10 years had actually passed. According to this world's age, wouldn't she be 33 or 34 years old now? Coincidentally, there was a stall selling jewelry at the side. That stall had a mirror. Ning Xuema didn't say anything, and picked up the mirror to look at herself. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. The image reflected in the mirror was still that of a young girl. She didn't look any different from before. She looked like she was 16 or 17 years old. She was so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Only her skin was a little rough, but she only needed to rest for 3 to 5 days, and it would immediately become smooth again. Miss, you really don't know Miss Lizine? The jewelry seller was a talkative person and couldn't help but ask. I don't know. Who is she? Ning Xuema casually asked. Her fingers were still touching her face as she tried to figure out what to use to heal her face faster. She is the person that Dizun Darren cares about the most. She is Dizun Darren's fiancée. Today is the day of their engagement. Right now, many influential figures have rushed to Buddha Lotus Mountain to congratulate them. Us commoners naturally don't have the fortune to go there, so we're just dressing up below to add to their festive mood. That man was frank and outspoken. Once he opened his mouth, he would talk nonstop. Clang! The mirror in Ning Xuema's hand fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Which ancestor? She asked softly. Which other ancestor? Isn't there only one ancestor in our Tianxi continent? The ancestor of Buddha Lotus Mountain Sun Moon sect. Ah, that old man actually had the idea of marrying a wife. This is something that no one expected. When this news spread, everyone was as surprised as you. AI, my mirror is very expensive. Miss, you have to compensate me a few taels of silver. Chapter 1430. Ning Xuema felt as if her heart had fallen into hell. Her hands and feet were cold. Although she tried her best to calm down, her hands and feet couldn't help but tremble. Where is this Lizine from? It was rare for the girl to have such a big reaction. The peddler was also proud of the power of his words. He poured out everything he knew. I don't know the details, but I heard that this girl is a Shangxian. She was personally brought back by Dizun 10 years ago. She has been living on Tianing Peak all these years. Dizun treats her very well, and often brings her out to play. I was lucky enough to see her once. The candied hawthorn seller next to him was not happy that his topic was stolen. So he said, I saw her too. I even saw Dizun buy a pearl hair clip for her. She was so beautiful when she put it on. Everyone on the street was stunned by her beauty. They talked about it happily. Ning Xuema's mind was buzzing, but she couldn't hear what they said after that. She casually slapped a large ingot of silver on a small jewelry stall, turned around and walked away. 10 miles of long street, 10 miles of bustling streets. The street was paved with bluestones. It was obviously very smooth, but she felt that it was uneven under her feet. The people around her were like a tide, laughing and talking as they passed by her. It was very lively and prosperous. She was in such a crowd, but she felt cold all over. It was so lonely that it was scary. Someone accidentally bumped into her. Someone apologized to her. And someone even asked her what was wrong. She didn't feel anything and just walked forward mechanically. It was as if she had walked to the end of the world. Unknowingly, she had walked to the end of the street. There was a wooden bench by the side of the road that tripped her. She staggered a few steps and sat down. Her hands and feet were cold and soft. The blood in her body seemed to have solidified at that moment, making her body stiff. When she walked here, it was as if all the strength in her body had been sucked away. She didn't want to take another step. It was morning, and it was late spring. The weather was warm. The sun had just risen and shone on Ning Xuema, making her face transparent like white jade. She was cold. The sun was so bright. The weather was so warm. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. It was terrifyingly cold. This kind of coldness made her brain feel as if it had frozen. Her brain stopped working, and her mind went blank. Many thoughts seemed to be whizzing through her mind, but at the same time, she seemed to be thinking of nothing. She just sat there and looked at the sun in the sky, lost in thought. She didn't know how much time had passed when her lower abdomen suddenly moved. It was as if the baby had kicked her. This kick wasn't very strong, and only made her belly bulge slightly, but it also directly kicked her out of her muddled state. Her body trembled, and her blood, which had been frozen stiff, finally began to flow. Her brain also began to work. The first thing that came to his mind was, what should he do? What was she going to do? It turned out that another 10 years had passed. It turned out that he had a new sweetheart. As it turned out, he was about to get engaged, and the other party was an extremely lofty, exalted immortal. It had only been a few months since they broke up, but the world had completely changed. She seemed to recall what Shinjili had said after he had been stabbed by her. Okay, I'll let you go. You guys take care of yourselves. It turned out that he had really chosen to let go at that time. He had really let go. She came back too late. Chapter 1431. No. The peddler said that Miss Lizine was brought back by Shinjili 10 years ago. In other words, not long after she broke up with him, he met her and fell in love with her at first sight. She didn't know who said that the ancestor didn't have such thoughts, but once he did, the ladies who wanted to marry him would line up from one end of the Tianxi continent to the other. Now it seemed that it was true. He had found a new lover so quickly. Lizine had been with him for 10 years on the Tianning Peak, but she had only been with him for 2 years. She had been with him for 2 years, but he didn't say anything about marrying her. At most, he would give her the position of a concubine. Lizine, on the other hand, had been with him for 10 years. Finally, their hearts clicked and they got engaged, becoming his official fiancé. Haha. What about her? What should she do? What should she do? Her blood was boiling in her chest, and in the end, her mind was filled with thoughts of what to do. She wasn't an impulsive person, and her previous profession made her unable to be impulsive at any time. So when she suddenly encountered such a fatal blow, she didn't do anything impulsive. Instead, she sat there calmly, trying her best to calm herself down, and then asked herself what to do. If it was her original personality, she would let go of her boyfriend easily, and leave if he cheated on her, and wanted to marry someone else. But now, she was really at a loss. When you really fell in love with someone, even if you knew it was impossible, it was still so difficult to let go. Her heart felt like it was soaked in ice water, and she needed to take a deep breath to stop it from going on strike. The sun shone on her face, making her eyelashes tremble. Her face was even paler than before. Miss, what's wrong? Hey, miss, are you feeling unwell? Hey, miss? Miss. Someone spoke beside her, and Ning Xuema opened her eyes as if she was awakened. Then she saw a circle of people around her. There were men and women, old and young. The person who spoke to her was a middle-aged woman. She worriedly touched Ning Xuema's forehead with the back of her hand. Miss, are you feeling unwell? You don't look well, are you sick? Do you want to see a doctor? I know a good doctor from a medical center in the city. The auntie was very enthusiastic. As she spoke, she wanted to help Ning Xuema up. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and shook her head with a forced smile. I'm fine. I'm just a little dizzy because I'm tired from walking. I'll be fine after some rest. Ah, so it's like this. Originally, I also had this problem, but after eating some sweets, I'll be fine. The auntie took out some homemade sweets from her pocket and quickly handed them to Ning Xuema. Child, eat one. At this time, Ning Xuema's reaction was a little slow. Her actions were all subconscious. She took the candy and put it in her mouth. It was clearly a very sweet candy, but her mouth was filled with bitterness. The bitterness made her stomach churn. Ugh! She couldn't control herself and vomited. Poor child, you are indeed not feeling well. The auntie patted her back gently. Ning Xuema vomited so much that she couldn't raise her head. When she finally stopped vomiting, she raised her head. The auntie looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. Are you a young lady? In this era, a young lady was a title for a married woman. Ning Xuema didn't answer. In fact, she couldn't answer. The auntie asked again, Are you suffering from morning sickness? Ning Xuema shook her head slightly. She had never been suffering from morning sickness, let alone now. Chapter 1432. Shall I bring you to see a doctor then? You can't be like this. There's no need. Ning Xuema could only spit out these 2 words before she spat out another mouthful of blood. The auntie couldn't hold it in any longer. You're vomiting blood. This won't do. I'll bring you to see a doctor. The madam is very nice, she's from the Sun Moon sect. She didn't finish her sentence, because the girl who was so pale that she almost couldn't stand had disappeared into thin air. Everyone was speechless. A deity? Was that girl a deity? Everyone was still in awe of deities. They all knelt down, and the scene was a little chaotic. What's going on? A man with delicate features who looked very capable appeared at the scene and asked. This man was the outer disciple of the Sun Moon sect, who was stationed in this small town. Although his position in the Sun Moon sect wasn't high, he was a master in the eyes of the people in this small town. Everyone immediately told him what they saw just now. The disciple specialized in collecting information. His martial arts might not be very high, but he was very knowledgeable. After listening to the story, his eyes were also filled with surprise. As far as he knew, there were very few people on this continent who could use the art of invisibility. One had to reach Earth rank level 8 to be able to do so. Even in the Sun Moon sect, only a few direct disciples of the ancestor could reach this level. There were even fewer people in the other sects who could do so, and it was even rarer for a woman to reach this level. Could it be? The disciple thought for a moment and began to report to the higher-ups. Ning Xuema just disappeared in public because she didn't want to be looked at like a monkey. She also didn't want to see a doctor. She was a doctor herself, so she naturally understood the condition of her body. The blood she vomited just now was just a mouthful of blood. She wouldn't die. Her heart was in a mess, and her chest and throat were burning. The baby in her belly probably also felt its mother's intense emotions. It also felt uncomfortable and kicked a few times in aggrievement. These kicks finally made Ning Xuema come back to her senses. She vomited out everything in her stomach, but her chest felt like it was stuffed with cotton. It was blocked and she didn't have any appetite. However, no matter what, she couldn't let the baby starve. For the sake of the baby's health, she should eat. She casually changed her clothes and appeared in another part of the small town. Then she walked into a restaurant. The restaurant was originally a gathering place for gossip. After Ning Xuema entered the restaurant, the news of the ancestors' engagement filled her ears. Even if she didn't want to listen, she couldn't. From their words, she knew that Lu Ziyin had been very popular in recent years. She was very clean and liked to eat at restaurants. Every time Di Zun brought her out, he would book the entire place for her. He would clean the streets, clear the place, and get someone to serve her. Moreover, the ancestor was generous. Whatever this Miss Lu liked, as long as she told him, he would buy it for her without hesitation. Everyone's tone was filled with envy towards Miss Lu Ziyin, but not many of them were jealous. After all, Lu Ziyin's status was very high. She was a fairy. A fairy and the ancestor were well matched in terms of social status. Finally, there was a scholar who shook his head and concluded, Fairy Lu and the ancestor are a perfect match. They are a perfect match. In this world, only Fairy Lu can move the ancestor's heart. Chapter 1433. That's right, the peak where the ancestor resides is called Heavenly Sound Peak. And this girl is called Ziyin. A match made in heaven. A match made in heaven. That scholar added. Hearing this, everyone agreed one after another. The restaurant was bustling with noise. Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't hold the chopsticks in her hand anymore. She was afraid that she would lose control and stab that scholar's throat. So she forced herself to eat a few mouthfuls of rice before paying the bill. She raised her head to look at the sun in the sky. It was almost noon, and it was said that noon was the time of their engagement. Ning Xuema tried her best to calm down and consider this question calmly. Rumors among the people were often exaggerated, so she couldn't lose her composure after hearing a few words. Seeing is believing, and hearing is false. No matter what, she had to see for herself to find out the truth. Taking in a breath, and then another, she steadied her mind and soared into the sky, flying directly towards the Sun Moon sect. The Sun Moon sect was bustling with noise and excitement today. Basically all the reputable people in the Tianxi continent were here. And the Sun Moon sect's main hall was truly packed with people. Yelu Jing, and was going crazy with work. On one side, she was arranging seats for various guests, receiving congratulatory gifts, and on the other side, exchanging greetings with people of similar status. She was so busy that her feet didn't even touch the ground, and she didn't even have time to take a breather. If it was someone else's engagement, a few tables would be set up, and a few reputable people would be invited to participate. But the ancestor was different. He was the god of this continent, and for this kind of person to get engaged, everything must be the best. The best red silk, the best banquet, the best guests, the best decorations in the main hall. All the buildings in the Sun Moon sect were repainted, and although there weren't big red she characters pasted everywhere like a wedding, they were all hung with red decorations. The ancestor didn't have any special requirements for this engagement banquet, and when Yelu Jing went to ask, he only got 3 words. Do as you see fit. Thus Yelu Jing did as she saw fit. With such an awesome master getting engaged, wouldn't he want the best? So from the decoration of the entire building to the placement of a pot of flowers in the main hall, Yelu Jing personally took care of everything, no matter how big or small. Even the red gauze fluttering on the eaves was made of shark silk, fluttering in the air like ribbons in the sea. Almost every guest who came here would be shocked by this extravagant spending. In his heart, he praised the Sun Moon sect for being so rich. How tasteful. It was already time. Yelu Jing couldn't help but look in the direction of Tianyin Peak. Why hadn't master and his future master's wife come down yet? Were they going to show off their love on the peak? There were still so many people here waiting and watching. This engagement also had to be particular about the auspicious time. It would be bad if the time was missed. The sound-transmitting talisman at Yelu Jing's waist flashed. Yelu Jing was in the middle of exchanging conventional greetings with a sect leader, and had no time to receive him. Looking at the light emitted by the sound-transmitting talisman, it was a message from a low-level outer sect disciple. It was probably about the discovery of the demon trace. He received dozens of such messages a day, so he didn't care much about it. It didn't matter whether he received it or not. He casually threw the sound-transmitting talisman to a disciple accompanying him, telling him to take the call. If there wasn't anything important, then there was no need to report. That disciple indeed walked to a corner to take the call. From the other end came the voice of an outer sect disciple, saying that a woman had appeared in Liteo City, and that she knew the art of invisibility. Chapter 1434. Yelu Jing's disciple didn't mind, casually reprimanding the outer sect disciple. There are many demons in this world who know this kind of trick. There are even some who don't understand and think they're immortals. You can just check with the other disciples. The outer sect disciple could only agree, and the sound transmission talisman finally extinguished. Yelu Jing finally found the time to ask after finishing this wave. The disciple replied, "Master, it's nothing. There seems to be traces of a female demon in Litao City. The outer sect disciples are investigating further." Yelu Jing nodded, not minding. Demons often appeared now, but most of them were just looking for food or clothes. They didn't cause trouble, so the Sun Moon sect was too lazy to pay attention to them. The sun had risen to the middle of the sky, and it was close to a good time. Suddenly someone whispered, "The ancestor is here." This voice was like a ladle of water being poured into a pot of hot oil. The crowd instantly flared up, and everyone collectively looked in one direction. 2 people were floating down from Heavenly Sound Peak side by side. A man and a woman. The man was wearing a cloud white robe with wide sleeves. His robe swayed behind him, forming a cloud path. He still wore a mask on his face, but this time, the mask didn't cover his entire face. It only covered the part above his lips, revealing his perfectly curved thin lips. It was the ancestor. The woman beside him was wearing a red dress. She had black hair and red lips. Her eyes were bright and resplendent, and she wore a cloak of the same color. The style was somewhat similar to the ancestors. At first glance, it looked like a couple's outfit. This woman was extremely beautiful. So beautiful that she didn't have the slightest bit of fire. When she flew down side by side with the ancestor, It was indeed very pleasing to the eye. People couldn't help but think of two words: immortal couple. This was a true immortal couple. In this world, there was no other pair that could compare to this pair in terms of appearance and elegance. It was only natural that they would get engaged. If they missed each other, it would simply be letting down the heavens' painstaking arrangements. The guests below all gave each other a thumbs up in their hearts, and were unprecedentedly convinced by this pair. Although most of these guests had heard of Lu Xian's name, many of them were seeing her for the first time. Who knew how many people were stunned after seeing Lu Xian's true appearance? This was a real beauty, a beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city. Her skin was as white as the clouds, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. When she turned slightly, it was as if there was a river of stars flowing in her eyes, making people unable to look away. What was even rarer was that this beauty was born with a smile. There were two beautiful dimples on her snow-white cheeks, making people feel happy at first sight. It seemed that after seeing her smile, even the biggest troubles could be thrown aside. Greetings, Dizun. Everyone inside and outside the hall bowed towards the sky. The sound of the mountain almost shook the entire Buddha Lotus Mountain. The ancestor floated in the air, his ink-black eyes drooping. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. He only spat out one word: exempt. His voice was low and magnetic, like the first breeze in the morning sky. Only then did everyone thank him and stand up. The ancestor and Lu Xian landed on the red carpet that was spread out from the main hall. The red carpet was covered with petals of unknown flowers. The fragrance of the flowers was strong, and the petals were as light as cotton. As the two people landed, the petals fluttered between their robes. Shenjuli frowned almost imperceptibly. He was wearing a mask, so no one could see his frown. Lu Xian's bright eyes curved into two crescent moons. Chapter 1435. She turned in a circle, her skirt fluttering as the petals circled around her even more happily. Brother D, these petals are so beautiful. When Lu Xian smiled, the sun in the sky didn't seem so bright anymore. Almost everyone was dazzled. You're even more beautiful. Who knew how many people added this sentence in their hearts? Beautiful, innocent, sweet, and with a bit of charm in her bones. All these characteristics gathered on her, making all the men's hearts beat wildly, and all the women clenched their fists. Shenjuli's gaze swept over Yelu Jing'an, who was bowing to him outside the red carpet. That gaze was slightly cold, but there was no emotion. Yelu Jing'an stood there with his head lowered, feeling like his back was being pierced by the gaze. He felt a slight chill, somewhat unable to touch the door. Did Master think it wasn't grand enough? That these petals weren't dreamy enough? One had to know that these flowers were treasures, called the velvet albizia flower. The petals were as soft as velvet and grew in pairs. They had a very good medicinal value, and were extremely rare. They grew deep in the mountains where ferocious beasts ran rampant. Usually, one flower was worth 1,000 gold, more expensive than ginseng. His disciples had suffered a lot in order to pick these flowers. One of them even almost lost a leg. Just now, he had picked these flowers and laid them on the ground to create a magnificent effect. It seemed that the future master's wife liked these flowers very much, but Dizun didn't seem to like them. Recently, master's thoughts were becoming more and more difficult to guess. Yelu Jing'an deeply felt that his master's calmness had improved greatly in these 10 years. Originally, he could guess a little bit of his master's thoughts from a few words, but now he couldn't guess at all. He only knew that his master's temperament was even colder and more solemn. When he got a little closer, his heart felt like it would be frozen. For example, this engagement ceremony. Dizun didn't ask any more questions after that one sentence. He didn't even come to take a look. He was really a big shopkeeper who didn't do anything. Only he suffered. He was desperately busy preparing everything. He couldn't eat or sleep well. He was so tired that the dark circles under his eyes overlapped several times. It wasn't easy being Dizun's disciple. Especially being Dizun's disciple. It was even more difficult. It was said that the emperor's will was hard to fathom. If he had to say, master's will was even harder to fathom. Yelu Jing'an mocked himself bitterly. Although an engagement couldn't compare to a marriage, Yelu Jing and deeply felt that the ancestors' engagement ceremony should still have music to liven things up. Of course, the music couldn't be those vulgar joyous tunes of the secular world. Instead, it was a pipa tune that Yelu Jing and had specially arranged for a disciple who was good at music to play. In addition to the sound of a guqin, the two kinds of music traveled over from an unknown place, carrying a faintly discernible immortal aura, as it leisurely reverberated over the entire main hall. All the guests couldn't help but praise in their hearts. This music was too beautiful. It was too extraordinary. This was too befitting of an emperor. The dimples on Lizine's cheeks deepened, and her eyes became brighter. She raised her hand to hold on to Shinjuli's arm, and smiled like a blooming flower. Brother D, this music is so beautiful. Thank you. Shinjuli paused for a moment. His body was slightly stiff, but he quickly returned to normal. He said, as long as you like it. His tone was light, with a hint of affection. This made all the guests exclaim in admiration in their hearts. It was said that the ancestor doted on Lizine. Seeing it today, it was indeed true. Chapter 1436. It was said that the ancestor pampered Lizine very much. Seeing it today, the rumors were true. The ancestor pampered this girl a lot. How domineering was a sentence of as long as you like it. Countless girls looked at Lizine with envy. To be able to receive the ancestor's love, this girl was really the luckiest girl in the world. Lizine's eyelashes curved and her snow-white cheeks blushed. Under the sunlight, it was as if her cheeks were dyed with rouge. In the Tianci continent, there were certain procedures for getting engaged. For example, walking the red carpet together, drinking wine together, exchanging tokens of love. It was similar to the modern-day engagement ceremony. Once the two parties exchanged tokens of love, it meant that the ceremony was complete. The girl would officially become the fiancée of the man. After that, they would go through the process of marriage. Usually, the difference between the engagement and marriage would be less than a year. Their engagement ceremony was held in the main hall of the Sun Moon sect. This hall was tall and majestic. Usually, when the Sun Moon sect had a big event or some celebration ceremony, this main hall would be opened. The original decoration style of this hall was solemn and solemn. Just like the People's Hall, it could accommodate 1,000 people at the same time. But now the decoration style was completely different. Red silk fluttered in the wind, silver bells rang, and flowers bloomed. The atmosphere was joyous and dreamy. Once they entered, the most eye-catching thing was red. Red screens, red ribbons, red tabletop, red plates, red lamps, different shades of red reflected in the eyes. Shinjuli paused again. Lizine also pursed her lips. It's too festive. Jing'en. Shinjuli's gaze turned to Yelu Jing, and who was following behind. Yelu Jing, and was full of apprehension. When he heard the call, he went forward and bowed. Ancestor. Change it. Shinjuli only said 2 words. Yelu Jing'en was speechless. Change what? In this hall full of glittering jewels, he really didn't know which one his master wasn't satisfied with. Ancestor, you should at least point out a specific direction. Master, what's wrong? He could only brace himself and ask. Shinjuli's gaze swept across the hall. It was rare for him to say more words. Is there anything wrong? Yelu Jing'en's body stiffened. His jaw almost dropped. None of them were appropriate. Heavens, if there were 1 or 2 problems, he could quickly send people to replace them. If there were still problems, it would be a huge project to replace them. Even if he grew 8 arms at the same time, he wouldn't be able to change them all in a short period of time. Moreover, the auspicious hour was about to arrive. Lizine also seemed to know that it was inappropriate to change all of them. She hurriedly said, Brother D, there's no need to change. This is actually not bad. It looked quite festive, in line with today's good day. I was just saying. Shinjuli's eyes darkened. Since you're not satisfied, why do you have to put up with it? He didn't feel like wasting words with Yelu Jing'en and waved his sleeve. Thus, under the shocked gazes of the guests, the hanging red silk, red flowers, and red tablecloths in the hall all disappeared. The originally jubilant hall was restored to its original state, solemn and sacred as if a congress was about to be held. Yelu Jing opened her mouth but didn't dare to speak. She was crying silently in her heart. Did the ancestor know how much effort he had spent to decorate this hall? The horizontal board and the red silk flowers at the corner of the table were all personally arranged by him. He almost didn't sleep the whole night. If he had known that his master disliked these things, he wouldn't have stayed up all night to work. Chapter 1437. His gaze then landed on Liziyin. His master really doted on this fiancée of his to the extreme. She had only said too festive, and his master had removed all the festive colors without a second word. You should at least leave a big red flower on the board. It can't be too festive, but you can't not be festive, right? Now the entire hall didn't look like an engagement ceremony at all. It looked more like a martial arts convention. Liziyin didn't seem to expect Shenjuli to do this, and was momentarily stunned. Shenjuli looked sideways at her and asked, "Are you satisfied with this?" Yelu Jing's gaze quickly turned to Liziyin, afraid that she would say that she wasn't satisfied and make other requests before dressing up. If that happened, it would be too late. This marriage was definitely not going to happen. Liziyin didn't dare to say that she wasn't satisfied. She quickly nodded and smiled sweetly. Satisfied, this is the best. Zine is very satisfied. It's good that you're satisfied. Shenjuli nodded slightly. He glanced at Yelu Jing'an, who was standing at the side in a daze. Let's begin. Begin what? A meeting? No, it was master's engagement ceremony. Yelu Jing'an took a deep breath and tried her best to get the feeling back. Under his command, all the guests began to take their seats. There were hundreds of tables in the hall. All the guests were the most prestigious people in the continent. Even the monarchs of the 5 countries were all present. They were the same as the heads of the various sects, and naturally sat near the center. These tables surrounded the high platform where the ceremony was held, like stars surrounding the moon. There was a red carpet path on the high platform that led to the outside. The entire layout could be said to be sparse and exquisite, extremely appropriate. The dozens of disciples of the venerable emperor, who was still alive, were all present. At this moment, they were standing on both sides of the high platform, looking extremely imposing. Helian Zhao's status was low. Originally, he didn't even have a seat in the hall. But after all, he was a prince of a country. This guy was a genius in martial arts, but he was clumsy when it came to doing odd jobs. Therefore, Yelu Jing'an simply let him sit behind his father. Because everything had been arranged in advance, everyone took their places very quickly and quickly sat down. Everyone present was a well-mannered person. Besides, no one dared to make a ruckus during the ancestors' engagement ceremony. Therefore, even though there were many people present, the hall was very quiet. Only the sound of music drifted through the air, lingering in everyone's ears. A tower of wine cups was placed on the ancient and heavy table. The wine cups were all carved out of crystal, and were neatly arranged in a certain order, from the lowest to the highest, and from the most to the least. At the very top were 2 cups that were close to each other. They were carved into the shape of mandarin ducks, and their necks were intertwined as they snuggled together. Yelu Jing'an held a small red wine flask in her hand, slowly pouring wine into the wine cup tower. The golden wine slowly poured into the 2 wine cups at the top, and then overflowed into the wine cups at the bottom. Speaking of which, it was strange. That small wine pot was obviously not big, but the wine inside seemed to be endless, as if it would never run out. Finally, all the wine cups were filled to the brim. They were shining brightly on the table, like a tower of crystal and gold. According to the procedure, the future newlyweds would drink the top 2 cups of wine, and the rest of the wine cups would be distributed to the guests below. They would all be tainted with the joy of the newlyweds. After pouring the wine, Yelu Jing'an and an 8th senior brother each held a cup and respectfully handed it to the venerable emperor and Liziyin. The golden wine gently swayed in the cup. Shenjuli looked at the cup for a moment and didn't move, as if he was pondering. Chapter 1438. It wasn't until Li Xin touched his arm with her elbow in confusion that he came back to his senses and took the wine cup. Li Xin's eyes lit up as she waited for Shenjuli to raise his cup to her. Shenjuli lowered his eyes and looked at the wine cup. He clenched his fist so tightly that his fingertips turned white. The other wine cups had been distributed by the Sun Moon sect's disciples to the various tables and into the hands of everyone with status. Everyone held their wine cups and stood up, waiting for the Dizun and Li Xin to clink their cups. Then, they would raise their wine cups to congratulate the Dizun and Li Xin before downing their cups in one gulp. This would signify the end of the climax. This meant that the engagement ceremony was more than half completed. The exchange of tokens would be considered a complete success. According to the usual practice, the man should raise his cup first before the woman shyly clinks her cup. However, Shenjuli just stood there without moving. The auspicious hour was about to pass. Everyone's arms were sore from holding their wine cups, but they didn't dare to rush him. They just looked at each other, and then at the Dizun. They didn't know what the Dizun was thinking of. Li Xin's blushing face turned slightly pale. She finally couldn't help but call out softly, "Brother D?" Shenjuli slowly raised his head and looked at her. He paused for a moment before finally raising his wine cup and saying, "Please." Yelu Jing'an, who was standing at the side, almost dropped his wine cup. "Master, you should be saying please at this time, and not please like in normal occasions. This doesn't conform to etiquette." Li Xin obviously knew about this etiquette. After all, she had already asked Yelu Jing and about the rules and procedures of this engagement banquet. Thus she knew everything. Now that she heard Shenjuli say this word, she was stunned. She didn't know whether to clink her cup or to remind him secretly. Yelu Jing'an was a smooth and slick person. He risked his life to send a voice transmission to the Dizun. "Master, please, please." He had once given his master a small note regarding the rules of the engagement ceremony. He believed that his master had read it before. Now that he had made a mistake, he probably forgot about it. Shenjuli frowned slightly. He glanced at Yelu Jing'an and ignored him. Shenjuli seemed to be a little impatient. He raised his wine glass again and spoke more straightforwardly this time. "Bang!" Yelu Jing'an. "Master, you didn't read the notes that disciple painstakingly wrote for you, right? He didn't see it, did he?" Li Xin made up her mind. She smiled and lightly clinked her wine cup with Shenjuli's wine cup, making a tinkling sound. She also took the opportunity to say one word, "close." Since he had forgotten to say it, she would do it. The other guests, who had been waiting with wine glasses in their hands, finally breathed a sigh of relief. They looked at each other and were about to say the congratulatory words they had prepared. Suddenly, a few clanging sounds came from outside. It was the hurried sound of a pipa. This pipa sound was extremely strange. It actually made the sound of metal and stone. It tore through the main hall like silk and interrupted the originally leisurely sound of the guqin and pipa. This sudden sound was extremely shocking, causing the hearts of almost everyone in the main hall to tremble. Some of the weaker ones were shaken by the sound of the pipa. The wine cup in their hands directly fell to the ground and shattered with a bang. Shenjuli's fingers that were holding the wine cup suddenly froze. The wine in the cup suddenly shook, and a part of it splashed out onto the back of his hand. He didn't seem to notice, and raised his head to look outside the hall. Chapter 1439. Yelu Jing'an's expression changed slightly. He hadn't arranged for anyone to play the pipa at this time. So this person obviously wasn't invited. And the Sun Moon sect was heavily guarded. Without an invitation, and a Sun Moon sect disciple leading the way, it was absolutely impossible for an outsider to enter the Sun Moon sect. Then how did this person come in without anyone noticing? And they only found out when he came to play the pipa outside the main hall. Dereliction of duty. This was a serious dereliction of duty. His figure rose, rushing towards the door. Who is it? Dizun's other disciples were also well trained. In a flash of light, they had already lined up in a row at the entrance of the hall. Facing the direction of the door, they asked in a deep voice. Who has come uninvited? The light at the entrance of the hall dimmed, and a large red figure appeared. It's me. The voice was clear and crisp like spring water dripping down from the mountains. It was a woman, and as soon as she appeared, everyone's eyes almost popped out. She wore a large red tube top embroidered with peony flowers, and a translucent scarlet shawl covering her body. Below, she wore a fiery red short skirt, and a thin translucent shawl of the same color was tied around her waist, fluttering with her movements. A pair of pink and smooth long legs were faintly discernible under the shawl. Her feet were bare, and a thin silver chain was tied around her snow-white ankles. There were 2 crystal bells on the silver chain, jingling as she walked. Her long hair was like a waterfall, draping over half her body. There was a circle of flowers on top of her head, and a flower the size of a teacup was in full bloom. Her arms were also bare, and there were silver bells on her wrists. Her feet seemed to be stepping on some kind of rhythm, so the silver bells on her body rang. Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling-ling-ling, as if she was playing some kind of music. Her face was covered with a large red shawl, which covered most of her face, only revealing a pair of eyes. There was a flame-shaped flower ornament between her eyebrows, which made her eyes look like flowing water, overflowing with light as she looked around. She should be dressed like a dancer, but she was different from ordinary dancers. No matter how beautiful or hot a dancer was, they didn't have her temperament, and they didn't have the impact that she gave people. She was like a charming poppy flower fairy, slowly walking in. The red veil fluttered behind her like flames. Her feet were like crescent moons. Her delicate toes stepped on the red carpet. Red and white contrasted, making the red redder, and the white whiter. Everyone present was an influential figure, and they had seen many beautiful women in their lives. It was inevitable that they would have some aesthetic fatigue. No matter how beautiful a woman was in front of them, most of them would treat her as nothing. Lizine was indeed beautiful. She was so ethereal that one couldn't take their eyes off her. However, none of them were as impactful as the woman who had just appeared. This woman gave people a powerful shock. Everyone felt as if their hearts had been struck by a heavy hammer. They held their breaths. There were even people who stood up in a daze. Bang! The wine glass in Shenjili's hand shattered. When Yelu Jing saw the woman's appearance, it was as if she was struck by lightning. She blurted out, "Little junior sister." Although the woman was wearing a veil, Yelu Jing was still very familiar with her. His eyes had always been very sharp. Even if he didn't look at her face, he could tell from her figure. Even though he had always been as calm as a mountain, his heart was beating wildly at this moment. He couldn't help but look at his master. All these years, little junior sister had always been a taboo in the Sun Moon sect. No one dared to mention her again. Who would have thought that she would appear today after disappearing for 10 years? And dressed like this. Chapter 1440. Everyone in the hall was shocked by Yelu Jing'an's shout. Everyone knew that there was only one person that Yelu Jing called junior sister. The legendary figure from 10 years ago, Ning Xuema. She used to be the ancestor's disciple, but 10 years ago, she entered the devil world and became the devil world's demon emperor. She also became the public enemy of many sects present. The ancestor personally passed down a decree to cut off their master-disciple relationship. It was said that he wanted to personally clean up the sect and not let other sects interfere. Just as everyone was waiting for the news of the ancestor personally punishing his disciple, news spread that she and the devil world's number 2 figure, Shuailan, had disappeared together. These 10 years, no one had seen her. Everyone was already guessing whether the ancestor had silently killed his disciple along with the devil head. It was just that he didn't announce it, but they didn't expect that she would actually appear at this moment. And in such a high-profile manner. No matter how beautiful a woman was, if she was from the devil world, then she was still a poppy flower that must be eradicated. Those cultivators who were originally stunned immediately felt their sense of justice explode, suppressing their pity for the beauty. Which, you actually dare to come to the Sun Moon sect to cause trouble? Which you're tired of living? Are you voluntarily coming to die? Which? Everyone shouted one after another, and some people even took out their weapons. There were even some impatient guests who wanted to show off their skills in front of the ancestor. They raised their hands and threw out their weapons. Flying daggers, flying swords, flying wheels, and even flying rods were all raised into the air. They spun around and shot towards Ning Xuema. Yellow Jing'an's expression changed. Those who could come to the Sun-Moon Sex engagement banquet weren't weak. Almost all of them were experts among experts. With these people joining forces to attack Ning Xuema, how could she block them? He raised his hand, about to receive the flying knives and swords, but his arm suddenly went numb, and he couldn't move for a moment. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the ancestor, his eyes filled with disbelief. Master actually stopped him. Could it be that Master's hatred for little junior sister had reached such an extent that he wanted to watch her being dismembered here? Before Yelu Jing could fully understand, those flying daggers and flying swords had already shot towards Ning Xuema like locusts. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed slightly. She raised her wrist and a green light shot out, spinning in the air. Clang, 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 clang. Those flying swords and knives were tangled up by the green light. Then the green light abruptly retracted. Following a few muffled sounds in the air, countless flying swords and knives fell to the ground. All of this happened within a few seconds. Those who were slow to react didn't even understand what had happened. Ning Xuema had easily resolved her crisis and destroyed a large number of weapons. She stood there gracefully, not even a strand of her hair out of place. If it wasn't for the pile of scrap metal at her feet, she would have thought that the attack just now was just a dream. Yelu Jing'an. Since when did little junior sister's martial arts become so shocking? It seemed like it was even taller than him. These people were thwarted in the blink of an eye. The other immortal cultivators were shocked and could no longer sit still. One after another, they took out their weapons, intending to attack. But when they saw the ancestor move, they froze. The ancestor was already sitting on the high platform. The shattered crystal cup at his feet sparkled like stars. His eyes fell on Ning Xuema's body. His gaze was extremely deep and dark. Although he didn't speak, there was a kind of pressure coming from his body. Chapter 1441. Although he didn't say anything, there was an oppressive aura around him. This aura caused those who were eager to rush over to kill the devil to freeze. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone attack Ning Xuema. Brother D. Lu Xian's expression changed slightly. She called out softly and approached him. Ning Xuema slightly raised her head to look at him. The two people's gazes collided with each other, separated by a distance of several dozen meters. It was as if they were fighting invisibly. His eyes were too deep and cold. When he looked at her, there was no expression on his face. It was hard to tell what he was feeling. After thinking and missing him for so long, she finally saw him again. However, it was under such circumstances. Her heart hurt, but it hurt so much that it felt numb. Ning Xuema wasn't late, but she wasn't early either. She felt that she was no longer a disciple of the Sun-Moon sect. They were probably enemies. Therefore, she didn't come here to deliver a greeting card. Instead, she came here invisibly. Although the Sun-Moon sect's enchantment was strong, it couldn't stop her, who was familiar with the Sun-Moon sect's enchantment. Furthermore, she came from the sky and landed on the Heavenly Sound Peak. The Heavenly Sound Peak originally had an enchantment. Only the disciples of the Venerable Sovereigns could enter at certain times with the help of their jade tokens. Ning Xuema used to be the most special one. She didn't need to use her jade token. She could use the patterns on her palm to press down on the enchantment at any time. This time, when Ning Xuema landed on the peak, she didn't find the enchantment protecting the peak. To be exact, there was no enchantment above. She came in easily. She stood there in a daze for a moment. When she first became his disciple, she suffered a lot because of his enchantment. There was once when she almost drowned in his wall-like enchantment. He didn't remove the enchantment, and didn't even change it. Now, was it because of Lu Xian? Was Lu Xian an idiot who dispelled enchantments? Or was it because of today's engagement ceremony? Ning Xuema walked around the heavenly sound peak with her chaotic emotions. The bamboo forest was still the same as before, and nothing in the surroundings seemed to have changed. The entire Tianyin Peak was quiet, and not a single person could be seen. When she finally made up her mind and went to the main hall where Shenjuli lived, she was stunned for a long time. Shenjuli's main palace was still there, and it didn't look any different. Just like the rumors said, the side hall she used to live in was no longer there. The two sides of the main hall were empty, just like her empty heart. Back then, when she heard the rumor that he had demolished the side palace she lived in, although she didn't say anything on the surface, she still didn't believe it in her heart, and still held on to a tiny bit of hope. Now that she had seen it with her own eyes, she had no choice but to believe it. It seemed like he really intended to cut off all ties with her at that time. She looked around again, but could not find the second building. Rumor had it that Lizine was staying at Tianyin Peak. Logically speaking, there should be a building built especially for her. Why couldn't he find it? Could it be that he would live in the same palace as Shinjuli? This thought was like a fire burning in her chest. She thought for a while and decided to enter the main hall. The moment she entered, she smelled the light scent that belonged to Shinjuli. She was dazed for a moment before she started to search in the main hall. The living room, the chess room, the practice room, the study room, the alchemy room, and finally his bedroom. There were traces of him everywhere in these places. Chapter 1442. His books, his paintings, the pots that he polished himself, the inkstone that he made himself. When everything that was once familiar to her appeared in front of her eyes again, her heart swelled. She once thought that she could let go of everything easily, but now, she realized that they were deeply engraved in her heart and could never be forgotten. Coming back here again, she felt like a wanderer who had returned home. This feeling lasted until she reached the Dizun's bedroom. When Ning Xuema lived here later on, she had been to Shinjuli's bedroom countless times. The door was always open to her, and Shinjuli did not guard against her at all. Although there was a wizardry barrier around his bedroom, it was useless to her. This was because the Almighty had personally taught her how to break the wizardry barrier. He even supervised her to break it, and made sure that there were no mistakes before letting her go. Later on, although he lost his memory, and she became his real disciple, the wizardry barrier did not change. She could still enter and leave as she pleased. This time, she found that the wizardry barrier was completely different. It was an extremely advanced wizardry barrier. The moment she arrived, she was bounced back by the wizardry barrier. She got up and looked at it for a moment. The wizardry barrier was awe-inspiring, and the psychokinesis flowing on it was extremely strong. It was not something that she could break at the moment. She would never be able to enter his chambers again. She paused at the door for a long time. Just as she was about to look elsewhere, she saw that the door of a hall beside her was half closed. This hall was also a part of Shinjuli's bedroom. It was usually used for storing miscellaneous items, and no one lived here. Ning Xuema did not know what she was thinking, but she pushed open the door and walked in. Then she stood there in a daze. The area of the hall was not big, and everything could be seen at a glance. All the miscellaneous items inside were gone, and in its place was a crystal bed. The light pink bed curtain was slanted on both sides. Neatly arranged bedding was revealed, and there were even a few pieces of women's clothes on the bed. There were a few other pieces of furniture in the hall. Although they were simple, they were very elegant. This room was obviously a woman's boudoir. There was also a faint fragrance in the hall. Needless to say, Lizine usually stayed here. No wonder she couldn't find Lizine's room in Tianyin Peak. It turned out that she lived here, next to Shinjuli's bedroom. Ning Xuema had spent quite a bit of time in this junk hall, because Shinjuli liked to pile up a lot of useless things here. To him, they might be useless, but to Ning Xuema, there were still many treasures here. She often found things she liked in there. This room gave her the feeling of a treasure hunting room. Every time she came, she would stay for a long time. But now, she could not stay here any longer. The aura here was suffocating her. She turned around and left. If it was said that she still had some hope when she first came to the Heavenly Sound Peak, all of her hopes were dashed now. She stood there. As there was no enchantment barrier, she could faintly hear cheerful and elegant music coming from below. Then she saw fireworks rising into the sky. It was obvious that the engagement banquet below had begun. It turned out that she had risked her life to come back here, just to attend his engagement banquet. The things were still the same, but the people were no longer the same. It turned out that she was the only one who stayed here. But he had already left, baby. It turns out that you are destined to have no father in this life. It's okay. Chapter 1443. Don't worry. After I'm done with him, I'll take you to other continents and find a place where no one knows us. Ning Xuema's finger gently stroked her belly as she whispered to the little baby inside. She found a secluded corner and changed into a set of clothes. She was wearing the same set of clothes she wore when she danced the Pipa dance in the Chong Kong country's palace. At that time, she shocked everyone with her dance and became his concubine with Shen Jiuli, who was disguised as Han Shanyue. That was how they got entangled later. She would end it where she started. This was in line with her usual style of doing things. Therefore, she hid herself and came to the main hall where the wedding was held. Then, she appeared in a high-profile manner. Once her identity was exposed here, she would be attacked by the righteous people. She was mentally prepared, so she dealt with it calmly. She was very powerful now, so her eyes were very sharp. She saw Shen Jiuli's little tricks. When those people attacked her, it was Shen Jiuli who secretly stopped Yilu Jing from helping. After not seeing her for 10 years, he really couldn't wait for her to die. If she died in front of him like this, he probably wouldn't even frown, right? She clearly broke those weapons and wasn't hurt at all. But her heart felt like it was stabbed by a knife. She pursed her lips and met his gaze without flinching. She smiled softly. Is this how the Sun Moon sect treats its guests? She said the first sentence after entering the door. Her voice was still cold. She kicked the scrap metal under her feet with the tip of her foot, and the pile of things made a clattering sound. You're not a guest of the Sun Moon sect, so they can't represent the Sun Moon sect. Shen Jiuli said, his voice as cold as usual. Although she was mentally prepared, Ning Xuema's bright eyes still dimmed. So in his heart, she didn't even have the right to be a guest, she smiled. Then in the eyes of the Dizun, what am I? What are you doing here? Shen Jiuli's voice was cold and emotionless. He didn't answer Ning Xuema's question. I came to sincerely consult the ancestor on a matter. Ning Xuema opened her mouth, her eyes firmly staring at him. I asked the ancestor to answer. What is it? The Dizun really wants to marry this Miss Lizine? This question was direct and sharp. Ning Xuema didn't beat around the bush. Although everything had proven her judgment, she still wanted to hear it from his own mouth. Only when she heard it from his own mouth would she be willing to completely give up. Shen Jiuli paused for a moment. Before he could say anything, Lizine, who was beside him, said, Brother D will definitely marry me. We are now engaged. Then, she grabbed Shen Jiuli's arm possessively. D brother? What a mushy name. So there would be a day when this great god would be called brother by a woman. Ning Xuema's gaze landed on their intertwined arms. That place used to be hers alone, but now, Shen Jiuli was a clean freak. Usually, he wouldn't allow anyone to get close to him. Only she could get close to him. Right now, he was holding his fiancée in the crook of his arm. She was mentally prepared. She was here to end everything. She thought she could accept whatever she saw, but when he held someone else's hand, her heart still tightened. Chapter 1444. Her heart tightened inch by inch in her chest, as if it was being pricked by a row of needles. Her hands and feet felt cold, but her expression did not change. Her face was calm, as if she had turned a blind eye to his intimacy with someone else. She did not care about Lizine. She only wanted to hear it from Shen Jiuli personally. She would only believe it if he said it to her personally. When she asked this question, her heart tightened again as if she was drowning. This was her last hope. Although this hope was like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time, she still did not want to give up. Shunjuli did not say anything. At such a distance, she could not see his eyes clearly. She could only see that his thin lips were tightly pursed. She steeled her heart and asked again, "Ancestor, is this question very hard to answer?" Today she must get an answer. Even if this answer threw her into a bottomless abyss, she still wanted to confirm it. If she wanted to despair, then she would completely despair. She was also tired of being left hanging like this. Although she was wearing a veil and people could not see her face clearly, her expression and figure were the same as before, without any change. Especially that pair of eyes, which could captivate people's souls. If people were not careful, they would fall into her eyes and be consigned to eternal damnation. Shunjuli's eyes darkened as he said lightly, "It has nothing to do with you." In just a few words, he had clearly cut off all ties between them and severed all ties. Ning Xuema smiled. Her smile made her eyes look like crescent moons. Everyone suddenly felt that although this Miss Ning was wearing a veil, her aura, figure and appearance were not inferior to that of Lu Ziyin, who was recently crowned as the #1 beauty in Tianxi continent. Especially this smile, which caused everyone's heart to tremble and tremble. Very good. Ning Xuema softly spat out these 2 words. Although he did not directly answer her, that sentence had clearly expressed his attitude. Her fate with him would end here. When a person made a decision, their heart would be calm. She took a step back and slightly bowed. "It has nothing to do with me indeed. Forgive me for asking. I wish Di Zun and Miss Lu to grow old together and be in love forever." Shunjuli's eyes darkened. He placed his hand on the armrest, and his sleeve covered his white fingertips. "Are you here to congratulate us?" Lu Ziyin stared at Ning Xuema's dress. "Your dress is very special. It looks like a dancer's dress." These words were filled with malice. Many of the people present were frequenters of the brothel, so they naturally knew what kind of clothes the dancers wore. Indeed, it was similar to what Ning Xuema was wearing at this moment, but it was not as exquisite as what she was wearing now. Hearing Lu Ziyin's words, many people laughed along with her. A straightforward person said loudly, "A demoness is a demoness, even wearing such immoral clothes. You." He didn't finish his sentence because the ancestor looked at him. The ancestor's gaze was extremely cold, causing the man's heart to tremble violently, and the blood in his body almost froze. He couldn't continue speaking. Shunjuli's gaze turned back to Ning Xuema. He deliberately avoided looking at her eye-catching dress, so as to not lose control and throw her or everyone present out. "Have you said what you wanted to say? That's all? Then you can leave. I can go now." This was an order for her to leave. Yes, she would leave, but not now. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and smiled. She had been smiling since she came in. Chapter 1445. Xuema came here in a hurry and didn't prepare any gifts for the engagement of the ancestor and this lady. "It's quite rude of me. How about I dance for you as a gift?" Shunjuli's expression changed slightly. He was about to say something when Lu Ziyin interrupted. Okay. Brother D, there should be singing and dancing at the engagement banquet to liven things up. It's also good to let Miss Ning dance a song." Everyone knew that Shunjuli doted on Lu Ziyin very much. He listened to whatever she said. At this time, fawning on Lu Ziyin was the same as fawning on the ancestor. Many people echoed, Okay. It's also good to dance a song. It's the ancestor's engagement banquet. With a witch singing and dancing to liven things up, it'll be a good story. That's right. Helian Xiao had been in a daze since the moment Ning Xuema appeared. At this moment he finally regained his senses. Seeing that everyone was mocking Ning Xuema, the anger in his heart surged. He couldn't help but jump in front of Ning Xuema. "Xuema, you don't have to ruin yourself like this. Come with me." He didn't care about anything else and pulled Ning Xuema's hand to leave. Whether she was a witch or not, he couldn't bear to see her suffer any grievances. He felt that he was going to explode from anger. He knew that Ning Xuema's 10 years of marriage was a taboo in the sect. He knew that those who violated this taboo would be punished. He also knew that it was very shocking for him to pull her away in front of everyone today. He might be expelled from the sect and hunted down, for example. When he held Ning Xuema's hand, he felt that the ancestors' gaze was on him. Although he didn't turn around to look, his sixth sense told him that the ancestors' gaze was definitely not friendly. But he couldn't care less. She was the most beautiful lady in his heart. Seeing her being humiliated was more unbearable and angrier than him being humiliated. He only wanted to bring her away from here safely. As soon as he took her hand and took a step forward, his hand was held by Ning Xuema. "Lian Xiao, thank you." Ning Xuema's whisper drifted into his ears. Then, he felt his body become light as he flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, he flew back to the chair he had been sitting on. Lian Xiao. He felt like he was dreaming. It turned out that she had already seen him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have known that he was originally sitting on this chair. The warmth of his butt was still on this chair. Zheng zheng zheng. The sound of a pipa rang out. Ning Xuema no longer paid any attention to Shen Juli's gaze on the stage. Her fingers plucked the strings of the pipa and began to play. The song she was playing was the one she had played in the vast Sky Country's imperial palace that day. After a few notes were played, it was as if everyone's heartstrings were being played. Everyone's heart felt as if ice water was flowing through it. The sound of the pipa was too clear and pleasing to the ears. Many people in the hall originally wanted to see Ning Xuema make a fool of herself. But after being shocked by the sound of the pipa, they couldn't bear to make a sound so as not to interrupt the heavenly sound of the pipa. Following the sound of the pipa, a picture scroll seemed to unfold in front of everyone's eyes. The boundless yellow sand stretched as far as the eye could see. The sound of the camel bell could be heard as the travelers gradually walked closer and further away under the setting sun. An ancient castle appeared in the anxiety of the travelers. The travelers cheered as they entered the castle, only to see modeled murals everywhere in the castle. On the murals, there were beautiful fairies dancing in circles with pipa in their hands. Following the beautiful fairies' dance, the dark castle regained its vitality. Oasis after oasis appeared in the vast desert. There were sweet rivers flowing, green grasses and delicate flowers swaying in the wind. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.